After my father's funeral, my sister Victoria suddenly gave me a bottle of vintage vodka to make peace. That night, my fiancé Liam had a glass. 60 minutes later, he collapsed. When I looked my sister in the eye at the hospital and said I let him drink the bottle you gave me, she went completely silent and panicked. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to survive a family that hides their toxicity behind Sunday hats and perfect smiles. The sharp, piercing screech of the heart monitor echoing through the intensive care unit is a sound that will haunt me forever. Liam was lying on the sterile hospital bed, a tangle of tubes keeping him alive while chaos erupted in the hallway. I am Maya, 30 years old, and right now I was watching the man I love fight for his life. But instead of comforting me, my mother Beatrice marched down the corridor, her designer heels clicking furiously against the linoleum. Before I could even speak, her hand flew across my face. The slap cracked loudly, drawing stares from the nurses at the station. "You could not let this family rest for one single day after your father's funeral," my mother screamed, her voice echoing off the walls. "Look what you did. You drugged him, Maya. You are out of control." I did not cry. Crying in front of Beatrice only ever gave her ammunition. Growing up in Atlanta, our family was considered the pinnacle of excellence in our church community. My mother made sure everyone saw the perfect facade. She pushed Victoria into the spotlight at every choir practice and charity gala, while I was the scapegoat, the rebellious daughter who never quite fit into her restrictive mold. I slowly turned my head, tasting copper in my mouth, and bypassed my mother entirely. My gaze locked onto my older sister Victoria, the golden child, the beloved director of our family charity. Victoria was standing a few feet away, clutching her expensive leather purse so tightly her knuckles were white. This was the same sister who used to steal my science projects in high school and claim them as her own, the sister who always played the victim whenever she was caught in a lie. But she was not looking at Liam with pity right now. She was looking at me with absolute, unfiltered terror. I stepped closer to her, lowering my voice so only she and my mother could hear. "I did not drink the $5,000 vintage vodka you gave me as a peace offering last night, Victoria." Victoria swallowed hard, her eyes darting frantically toward the glass window where doctors were rushing to stabilize Liam. "I gave it to Liam." I continued my words, hitting her like physical blows. "I do not drink dark liquor, remember. You would know that if you actually cared about me." 60 minutes after he had a glass, his heart stopped. "Care to explain why you look terrified right now instead of angry?" Victoria stumbled backward, her perfect church facade crumbling in an instant. "No," she stammered, her voice shaking violently. "No, it was supposed to be you. I mean, why would he drink it? It makes no sense." The admission slipped from her lips before she could catch it. My mother froze momentarily, breaking her performance as the grieving righteous matriarch. But Beatrice had spent 30 years protecting the family image, and she was not about to let her golden child take the fall for whatever was happening. "Officers right here!" my mother yelled, waving her hands toward the end of the hallway. Two police officers approached us rapidly, their hands resting on their utility belts. My mother pointed a manicured finger directly at my chest. "Arrest her. She has a history of instability. She dropped out of law school, she disappeared for years, and now she is trying to hurt her poor fiancé. My sister and I found him collapsed in her apartment." I stared at my mother, marveling at how easily the lies flowed. They had arrived at my apartment unannounced this morning, demanding to discuss the estate, only to find the paramedics loading Liam onto a stretcher. Now they were spinning it into a crime scene of my making. "Ma'am, turn around and place your hands behind your back," the taller officer instructed, stepping into my personal space. "You cannot be serious," I said, maintaining my composure. "You need to test the bottle of vodka in my apartment. My sister brought it to me last night. It is poisoned." "Do not listen to her," Victoria cried out suddenly, finding her voice again. "She is delusional. She has always been jealous of me. She probably took too many pills and gave him the wrong medication." Please, officers, she is a danger to herself and everyone else. The officer grabbed my wrists, pulling them behind my back and snapping the cold metal handcuffs into place. The humiliation of being arrested in a hospital hallway while the man I loved was fighting for his life was suffocating. People were stopping in the corridors watching the spectacle. My mother looked around, ensuring that any church members or family friends who might be present saw her as the tragic, long-suffering mother dealing with a troubled child. But I refused to give them the reaction they desperately wanted. I did not scream. I did not thrash. I had spent the last 5 years building a cybersecurity empire from the ground up, secretly outsmarting hackers and corporate spies, while my family thought I was a failed internet salesperson. I was not going to let a toxic family take me down in a hospital corridor. As the officers began to march me toward the elevator, Preston, my white brother-in-law, jogged out of the stairwell. He was wearing his usual slick investment banker suit, slightly out of breath, his eyes darting around the hallway. Preston always acted like he owned our family, leveraging his financial background to manage the megachurch funds my mother controlled. He walked straight up to Victoria and my mother, whispering something urgently. I twisted my neck to look back at them. The elevator doors began to slide shut, but right before they closed, I saw it clearly. Preston reached into his tailored coat and adjusted something heavy. The unmistakable shape of the empty vintage vodka bottle, the exact one Victoria had handed me last night, gleamed briefly under the hospital lights before he pushed it deep into his pocket. They were destroying the evidence. And as the elevator descended to the police cruisers waiting outside, I realized this was not just about a bitter sister. This was attempted murder. And they had no idea who they were dealing with. The interrogation room smelled of stale coffee and cheap disinfectant. Detective Miller sat across from me, tapping his pen with an irritating rhythm. He leaned forward, his face arranged in a mask of practiced sympathy that I saw right through. Your mother is very worried about you, Maya. He slid a notepad toward me. She told us everything. How you dropped out of law school, how you have been struggling financially, how you have a history of making erratic choices to get attention. She thinks you snapped, gave your fiancé something you should not have, and are now trying to blame your sister. Just sign the confession. We can get you psychiatric help instead of prison time. I looked at the pen, then up at his smug face. My mother has always been an exceptional storyteller. I leaned back in the stiff plastic chair, crossing my arms. But I am not signing anything because I did not commit a crime. The detective sighed heavily, dropping the sympathetic act. Look, we know you are broke. Your family cut you off. You saw an opportunity to stage a medical emergency, maybe sue the hospital or extort your sister. It is pathetic. I did not argue. Arguing with a man who had already made up his mind was a waste of breath. Instead, I raised my left wrist. My smartwatch screen illuminated the dim room. I tapped the banking application, accessed my offshore account through a secure biometric scan, and authorized a wire transfer. What are you doing? The detective snapped, reaching across the table. You are not allowed to use that in here. I am paying my bail, I stated calmly. Bail is set at $500,000 in cash. He laughed, a harsh grating sound. A dropout like you cannot even afford the processing fee. Right on cue, the heavy metal door clicked open. A desk sergeant stepped inside, holding a stack of freshly printed documents. His eyes were wide behind his wire-rimmed glasses. Sir, he said, looking from the detective to me. The bail just cleared, paid in full, $500,000 transferred directly from a private corporate account. The jaw of the detective went completely slack. He stared at me as if I had just sprouted a second head. Who paid it? He demanded. The sergeant swallowed hard. She did. I stood up, smoothing down my skirt. I believe I am free to go now. Have a wonderful evening, detective. I suggest you test that vintage vodka bottle before my brother-in-law manages to dispose of it completely. I walked out of the precinct, the cool Atlanta night air hitting my face. The streetlights illuminated the empty sidewalk, but I was not alone. Leaning against a sleek black Mercedes was Preston. He wore his tailored suit like a suit of armor, checking his Rolex with an air of profound impatience. When he saw me, a cruel smirk twisted his lips. Well, look who managed to crawl out. Preston reached into his inside breast pocket and pulled out a thick manila envelope. He tossed it onto the hood of his car. There is $10,000 in cash right there. Take it, leave Atlanta tonight, and let this family mourn your father in peace. If you disappear, Victoria will not press charges for your little stunt at the hospital. I looked at the envelope, then at Preston. $10,000. You really think that is enough to buy my silence? Do not play tough with me, Maya. Preston sneered, stepping closer. You are a law school dropout who plays with computers all day. Your mother told me you could barely afford your rent last month. You are an embarrassment to the family name. Take the money before I let the police throw you back in a cell. I laughed, a genuine bright laugh that echoed down the quiet street. It felt incredibly good. Preston, you really should pay closer attention to the tech industry. I did not drop out of law school because I was failing. I dropped out because I developed a proprietary encryption software algorithm. And that little internet project you are mocking. I sold the patent to a major cybersecurity firm 2 weeks ago for $20 million. Preston froze. The smugness drained from his face, replaced by a pale, sickly expression. He stared at me, his mouth opening and closing like a fish pulled out of water. 20 million, he repeated, his voice barely a whisper. I stepped past him, ignoring the envelope on his car. Keep your 10 grand, Preston. It sounds like you are going to need it to pay off those massive gambling debts you have been racking up in Macau. And by the way, I saw you hide the vodka bottle. Enjoy your accessory to attempted murder charge. I pulled out my phone and ordered an Uber, leaving Preston standing paralyzed on the sidewalk. As the SUV pulled up, I gave the driver the address for the family estate lawyer. I knew exactly what my mother and sister were doing right now. They thought I was locked away in a holding cell, out of sight and out of mind. They thought they had secured their victory. The ride across town was quick. I watched the city lights blur past the window, my mind calculating every single move. They had underestimated me for 30 years. They had treated me like a scapegoat, a punching bag, a convenient distraction from their own rotting morals. But tonight, the rules had changed. The Uber pulled up to the towering glass building in the financial district. I paid the driver, stepped out into the chilly wind, and strode confidently through the glass revolving doors. I rode the elevator to the top floor, the silence of the ascending cab a stark contrast to the storm I was about to unleash. I stepped off the elevator and walked silently down the plush carpeted hallway. At the end of the corridor, heavy mahogany doors marked the entrance to the senior partner conference room. The doors were slightly ajar. I could hear my mother speaking sharp and commanding, drifting into the hallway. She is in custody. The lawyer can confirm it, Beatrice was saying. We do not need to wait for her. Break the seal on the will right now. We need to transfer the charity funds into Preston holding account before the banks open tomorrow morning. I placed my hand on the cool brass handle of the mahogany door. They were about to commit federal fraud, assuming I was completely neutralized. I took a deep breath, letting the anger fuel my focus. The heavy doors swung open with a resounding thud that echoed across the expansive room. Inside, the scene was perfectly arranged for a betrayal. My mother Beatrice sat at the head of the polished table, her posture rigid and demanding. Victoria sat beside her, nervously twisting her diamond rings, while the family lawyer held a gold letter opener above a thick wax-sealed envelope. Preston must have sped through red lights to get here because he was just walking through a side door, still sweating from our encounter at the precinct. Every head snapped toward me. The lawyer dropped the letter opener. It clattered loudly against the wood. My mother stood up so fast her chair scraped violently against the floorboards. "What are you doing here?" Beatrice shrieked, her perfectly manicured hands gripping the edge of the table. "You are supposed to be in jail." I walked confidently into the room, pulling out a chair directly opposite my mother and taking a seat. I smiled warmly at the shocked faces surrounding me. "I posted bail, Mother." I crossed my legs, resting my hands on the table. "And I believe under state law, a will cannot be legally unsealed and executed without all named beneficiaries present in the room. So please do go ahead and proceed with the official reading. I am ready to hear exactly what my father left behind." The mahogany doors slammed behind me, sealing us inside the conference room. The silence was thick, broken only by the sound of Preston exhaling a sharp, shaky breath. My mother Beatrice stood frozen at the head of the long table. Her tailored black mourning dress looked more like armor than a widow garb. She gripped the edge of the polished wood so tightly her manicured knuckles turned pale. "What will the church elders say when they find out my youngest daughter was arrested for drugging her fiancé?" Beatrice hissed, her voice vibrating with suppressed rage. "You are a permanent stain on this family pristine legacy." I pulled out a chair and sat crossing my legs with deliberate slowness. "I find it fascinating, Mother, that your biggest concern right now is Sunday morning church gossip instead of Liam fighting for his life in the ICU. Or the fact that my father was buried just 48 hours ago." I gestured toward the sweating attorney. "Please, Mr. Sterling, do not let me interrupt the official proceedings. I believe you were about to break the seal." Sterling looked terrified. He wiped his damp forehead with a linen handkerchief, his eyes darting toward my mother for permission. Beatrice gave a curt, furious nod, taking her seat beside Victoria. Victoria sat up straight, her posture radiating arrogant triumph. Preston stood near the expensive minibar, pouring himself a generous glass of scotch, trying to regain his shattered composure. Mr. Sterling cleared his throat and broke the thick red wax seal on the envelope. He pulled out the heavy parchment documents. "As you all know," he began, his voice trembling slightly, "Arthur Vance was a man of immense faith and community standing. His final wishes reflect his dedication to the church and the continuation of the Vance family excellence." I watched my mother lift her chin, soaking in the words like well-deserved praise. "To my devoted wife, Beatrice." Mr. Sterling read, "I leave the primary residence in Buckhead along with the standard marital trusts. To my eldest daughter Victoria and her husband Preston, I leave the full operational control and sole beneficiary rights to the Vance Megachurch Community Fund, currently valued at $50 million. Furthermore, the commercial real estate portfolio in downtown Atlanta shall be transferred entirely to Victoria Vance." A smug smile spread across Victoria's face. She turned to me, her eyes gleaming with malicious satisfaction. Preston took a long, triumphant sip of his scotch, his previous panic momentarily forgotten, in the face of absolute control over millions of dollars. They had won. They had officially stolen the entire empire my father had built from the ground up. Mr. Sterling flipped to the final page. He hesitated, refusing to meet my eyes. "And to my youngest daughter, Maya." He swallowed hard. "I leave the contents of safety deposit box number 409 at the First Atlanta Fidelity Bank. The key is enclosed in this envelope." The lawyer reached into the envelope and pulled out a single tarnished, rusty brass key. He slid it across the long mahogany table. It stopped right in front of me, looking like a piece of garbage against the highly polished wood. The room erupted into a chorus of cruel, mocking laughter. My mother let out a breath of pure relief, adjusting her diamond necklace. Victoria leaned across the table, her eyes locked onto the rusty piece of metal. "A rusty key, Maya," Victoria said, her voice dripping with venomous pity. "That is exactly what you deserve. Dad knew you could not even manage a church bake sale, let alone a $50 million legacy. You dropped out of law school to sell cheap face creams online. You are a joke. You have always been a joke. You should have taken Preston $10,000 and ran when you had the chance. Now you are left with literal scrap metal." I did not reach for the key immediately. I sat perfectly still, letting their arrogant laughter fill the room. They felt invincible. They believed their facade of black excellence was impenetrable. They believed my father had punished me for stepping out of line. But my father was a meticulous, brilliant man who never did anything without a highly calculated, strategic reason. I picked up the key. The metal was heavy, cold, and rough against my skin. I turned it over in my palm. "A legacy, Victoria?" I asked, my voice deadly calm, cutting through their laughter like a razor blade. Victoria stopped smiling. "Are you talking about the same pristine legacy that Preston has been quietly draining for the past 2 years?" I continued, leaning forward. "Or do you mean the community housing fund he has been aggressively using to pay off his massive illegal gambling debts in Macau?" Preston choked violently on his scotch. The heavy crystal glass slipped from his hand and shattered against the hardwood floor, sending amber liquid splashing across my mother designer shoes. He started coughing, his face turning an alarming shade of crimson as he struggled to breathe. Victoria jumped up from her chair. "What are you talking about? Preston, what is she talking about?" I ignored her screaming and looked down at the rusty key in my palm. My thumb brushed over a tiny, almost invisible engraving near the base of the brass. An eagle with spread wings. The emblem of First Atlanta Fidelity Bank. But not just the public branch. This was the specific, highly secure private vault branch my father strictly used for one thing: his unedited, untampered private financial audits. The audits he kept completely hidden from Preston and the corrupt church board. This key was not an insult. It was not a punishment. It was a weapon. My father knew they were stealing, and he had locked the concrete proof away where only I could find it. I gripped the key tightly in my fist, a genuine, terrifying smile spreading across my face as Preston continued to hack and wheeze by the minibar. I stood up from the mahogany table, looking directly at my mother's horrified face. "Keep the 50 million on paper, Mother," I said smoothly. "Because by tomorrow morning, that money is going to be the exact reason all of you end up in a federal prison cell." I did not wait to see the color fully drain from my mother's face, or to watch Preston finally collapse into a pathetic coughing fit on the mahogany floor. I turned on my heel and walked out of the law firm, the rusty brass key burning a hot circle against my palm. The sun was just starting to rise over the Atlanta skyline, casting long, sharp shadows across the pavement. I hailed a black car service and gave the driver the address for First Atlanta Fidelity Bank. As my car pulled into the morning traffic, my phone vibrated with an alert from my home security network. Victoria wasted no time. A notification pinged, showing a dark gray sedan idling aggressively outside my apartment building, and now another identical sedan was weaving through traffic 3 cars behind my current ride. Victoria had hired private investigators to tail me. She was desperate to know what that key opened. I tapped the partition glass and handed the driver an extra $100 bill. I told him to take the service tunnel under the convention center and drop me at the rear loading dock of the financial district. With a sharp turn, we vanished into the underground tunnel, leaving the amateur investigator stuck at a red light. First, Atlanta Fidelity was not a standard retail bank. It was a fortress of marble and bulletproof glass designed specifically for high-net-worth clients who demanded absolute discretion. I bypassed the main lobby and took the private elevator down to the subterranean vaults. The vault manager recognized my father's name immediately and escorted me to the heavy steel door of Box 409. My hands were surprisingly steady as I slid the rusty key into the lock. It turned with a heavy, satisfying click. I pulled the long metal drawer out, expecting stacks of offshore bank records or hidden stock certificates. Instead, the box was entirely empty, save for one object resting in the center. It was a matte black military-grade encrypted hard drive. I stared at it, a slow smile creeping onto my face. My father knew exactly who I was. He knew Victoria could never access this. He knew Preston cheap bankers' tricks would be useless against it. He left this for the cybersecurity CEO he secretly raised. I grabbed the drive, shoved it into my bag, and headed straight to my secondary corporate office. My main apartment was compromised, but this office was a digital fortress I built off the grid. I locked the heavy reinforced door behind me, booted up my primary terminal, and connected the drive to an isolated, secure network. The screen instantly flashed neon red, demanding a complex cryptographic key. It was a level of encryption used by defense contractors. I cracked my knuckles and started typing, launching a brute force decryption sequence I had written myself. Just as the progress bar hit 20%, my burner phone lit up with an incoming call. The caller ID flashed my mother name. I hit answer, putting her on speaker while my fingers continued flying across the keyboard. "Maya, you listen to me very carefully," Beatrice hissed, her voice dropping its usual polished southern charm and adopting a tone of sheer venom. "You have humiliated this family enough. Preston is hyperventilating in the car, and Victoria is in hysterics. I do not care what delusions you have convinced yourself of. You will bring that key back to the house right now." I typed another string of code, bypassing the second firewall on the drive. "I am a little busy right now, Mother." If you do not hand over whatever Arthur left in that box, I will ruin you." Beatrice threatened, her voice trembling with rage. "I will stand at the pulpit this Sunday and officially excommunicate you from the church community. I will tell the entire congregation that you are unstable, violent, and completely estranged from the Vance family. You will be a pariah, Maya. No one in Atlanta will ever do business with you again." The progress bar on my screen hit 80%. I leaned closer to the microphone. "Go ahead, Mother. Tell the congregation whatever you want. Because by the time you take the pulpit, they are going to be a lot more interested in where their weekly tithes have been going." "What are you talking about?" Beatrice demanded, her breath catching sharply in her throat. "I will let you know when I finish doing the math," I replied coldly, and ended the call. The screen flashed brilliant green. "Access granted." The heavy encryption dissolved, revealing a single master folder labeled Vanguard Housing Project. I clicked it open and a massive spreadsheet materialized on my monitor. This was not just a file, it was my father's private ledger. He had been conducting a shadow audit of the megachurch finances for the past 2 years. My eyes scanned the rows of numbers and my blood ran ice cold. Victoria and Preston had not just been skimming off the top, they had orchestrated a systematic bleeding of the community housing fund. Millions of dollars donated by hardworking church members to build affordable homes had been funneled directly into offshore shell companies created under Preston's name. I clicked on the linked invoices. They were all forged. Fake construction materials, fake contractor fees, fake consulting hours. Preston was using the church as a personal piggy bank to fund his high-stakes gambling addiction in Macau, and Victoria was signing off on every single fraudulent check to maintain her lavish lifestyle. My father had documented every stolen dime. He had tracked every wire transfer. He had built a flawless, ironclad case against his own daughter and son-in-law. He was preparing to hand this entire drive over to the federal authorities. I scrolled down rapidly, my heart hammering against my ribs as I reached the very bottom of the ledger. There was a final personal journal entry attached to the last row of stolen funds. I opened the text file. The entry was brief, but it hit me harder than a physical strike. My father wrote that he was confronting Victoria and Preston tonight. He wrote that he would give them one chance to confess to the church elders before he called the FBI. I looked at the date stamp on that final entry. It was dated exactly 3 weeks ago. It was the exact night my father supposedly died of a sudden catastrophic heart attack in his study. My breath caught in my throat. I pushed my chair back from the monitors, the horrifying reality crashing over me. My father was perfectly healthy. He had no history of heart disease. But Victoria and Preston had everything to lose. I grabbed my phone, my hands shaking as I pulled up Liam's medical chart from the hospital portal. The doctors were baffled by Liam's sudden cardiac arrest. They could not find a cause. But Liam had drank the vintage vodka Victoria gave me, a peace offering she insisted I drink to calm my nerves. The symptoms were identical. The sudden chest pain, the rapid drop in blood pressure, the instantaneous heart failure. My father did not die of natural causes. Victoria and Preston did not just steal $50 million. They murdered him to cover it up. And last night, they tried to murder me with the exact same untraceable poison. The hospital alarm bells echoed in my memory. Liam was dying right now because he took the bullet meant for me. I stared at the glowing screen, the absolute proof of their motives glaring back at me. I closed my laptop and stood up. They wanted a scapegoat. They were going to get a federal reckoning. I locked my laptop, slipped the decrypted hard drive into the hidden lining of my leather tote, and walked out of my secure office. The neon lights of the Atlanta skyline were fully illuminated now, casting a harsh glare over the city. I needed to return to my penthouse. Even though I knew my mother and sister had likely compromised the space this morning, I needed Liam's medical proxy documents and a fresh change of clothes before heading back to the intensive care unit. I also knew that acting predictably was the best way to bait a rat out of hiding. I took the private elevator up to my floor. The heavy oak door to my apartment was unlocked, sitting slightly ajar. I pushed it open. The faint, sickening, sweet scent of the spilled vintage vodka still lingered in the air near the kitchen island where Liam had collapsed. But the space was not empty. Sitting on my custom velvet sofa holding a glass of my premium bourbon as if he owned the place was Preston. He stood up slowly as I walked in, raising his hands in a gesture of surrender. He had completely dropped the frantic, sweating panic from the lawyer's office. He was back to playing the slick, rational investment banker, smoothing the lapels of his suit and offering me a sympathetic, entirely fabricated smile. "Maya, please do not call the police," Preston said softly, taking a cautious step forward. "I came here to help you. We need to talk, just the two of us. No Beatrice, no Victoria. Just the outsiders of the Vance family trying to survive." I dropped my keys onto the glass coffee table, the sharp clink echoing in the quiet room. I did not break eye contact. I crossed my arms and waited, letting the silence stretch until his artificial confidence began to crack. "You are a smart woman," Maya Preston continued, pacing slowly across my living room. "You always have been. You know exactly what your mother is capable of. Beatrice is a monster who cares about nothing but her precious megachurch image. And Victoria? Well, Victoria is completely out of her mind. She is unraveling. I had absolutely no idea she poisoned that bottle of vodka. I swear to you, on my life. When she told me what she did, I was sick to my stomach. I watched him perform, analyzing every micro-expression. He was trying to throw his own wife under the bus to save his skin. She acted alone. Preston insisted, stepping closer, lowering his voice into a conspiratorial whisper. She forged those charity documents. She skimmed the community housing funds. And when your father caught her, she panicked. She spiked his evening tea. I tried to stop her, Maya, but she threatened to frame me for all of it. I have been living in terror." He paused, letting out a heavy, dramatic sigh, playing the role of the tragic hostage husband to perfection. "But we can fix this," he said, his eyes locking onto my leather tote bag. "Give me the hard drive. I know you found it. Give it to me and I will handle the church elders. I will make sure the funds are quietly replaced. I will personally arrange to have Victoria committed to a private psychiatric facility in Switzerland. She clearly needs serious professional help. And for your trouble, for the pain this family has caused you, I will wire $2 million into your account tonight. You can take Liam, leave Atlanta, and never deal with their toxicity again. $2 million, Maya. Cash." I let out a harsh, echoing laugh that visibly startled him. I walked over to the kitchen island, tracing my finger along the cold marble where Liam had nearly died. "A psychiatric facility," I repeated, my voice dripping with absolute disgust. "You want to lock your own wife in a padded room just to cover your tracks? That is exceptionally cold, even for you, Preston." "Maya, I am trying to save you," he pleaded, his voice tightening with desperation. $2 million is more money than you will ever see in your lifetime selling software online." I turned to face him, dropping my own polite facade. $2 million? I stated, my tone razor sharp. "Preston, you do not even have $200 to your name." His charismatic smile faltered. "Do you really think I am the same naive girl you met 10 years ago?" I asked, closing the distance between us. "I ran a background check on you the day Victoria brought you home for Thanksgiving. I know about your 3 failed LLCs in Delaware. I know about your frozen offshore accounts in the Caymans. I know you are legally barred by the SEC from managing nonprofit funds due to your previous embezzlement charges, which is exactly why you needed to marry Victoria. You needed her clean, untarnished signature to access my father's charity money." Preston's face turned an ugly, mottled shade of purple. The suave banker routine evaporated, leaving behind a cornered, desperate fraud. "Victoria is arrogant and greedy," I continued, my words hitting him like physical strikes. "But she is too stupid to orchestrate a systematic bleeding of a $50 million community housing project. You are the mastermind. You funneled that money through shell companies to pay off the massive illegal gambling debts you racked up in Macau. My father found out. He threatened to call the feds. So you bought the untraceable poison, and you convinced your desperate, status-obsessed wife to slip it into his tea. And last night you handed her the vodka and told her to eliminate the last loose end, me." "Shut up!" Preston snarled, his voice dropping into a vicious, guttural growl. "You arrogant little brat! Give me the drive!" He lunged at me, his hands violently grabbing for the leather tote slung over my shoulder. His fingers clamped painfully around my forearm, his sheer size and weight pushing me back against the marble counter. But I had not come to a compromised apartment alone. Before Preston could yank the bag from my shoulder, the shadows in my hallway shifted. Two massive men dressed in dark tactical suits stepped into the living room. They were elite private security contractors I had discreetly retained the moment my company hit a billion-dollar valuation. "Get off her!" the lead guard commanded, his voice like thunder. Preston barely had time to turn his head before the guard grabbed him by the collar of his cheap suit, twisting his arm sharply behind his back. Preston let out a pathetic yelp of pain as his knees buckled. The second guard grabbed his other arm, lifting him entirely off the floor. I adjusted my jacket, staring down at his struggling, pathetic form. "Your suit is from a clearance rack, Preston. If you are going to play the billionaire savior, at least tailor your jacket. Get him out of my sight." The guards dragged Preston, thrashing and cursing, across the hardwood floor toward the front door. They shoved him out into the hallway just as the elevator doors chimed open. "You think you have won?" Preston screamed, his face red with frantic, unhinged fury as the guards shoved him toward the elevator car. "You think you are so smart, Maya. You think you have outplayed us." I stood in the doorway, my face completely devoid of emotion. "Liam's parents are flying into Atlanta right now," Preston yelled, his voice echoing down the corridor as the elevator doors began to close. "I already called them. I told them exactly what your mother said. I told them you went crazy and poisoned their son. You are going to rot in a cell. They are pressing attempted murder charges against you today." The elevator doors slid shut, cutting off his frantic screaming. I stood in the sudden silence of my apartment, my jaw clenched so tight my teeth ached. Liam's parents were old money conservatives who had always hated me, always viewed me as an unworthy outsider, and now Preston had just handed them the ultimate weapon to destroy my life before I could even save Liam. Preston's threat echoed down the hallway, bouncing off the walls long after the elevator doors had shut. Liam's wealthy conservative parents were flying into Atlanta, fueled by my family's lies, ready to press attempted murder charges against me. Panic is a luxury I could not afford. My mother and sister were working overtime to frame me, wrapping their crimes in the wholly untouchable cloth of our church community. I needed to dismantle my mother's credibility before she could poison Liam's family any further. And the absolute best place to destroy a hypocrite is right on her own stage. Sunday morning arrived with bright, blinding sunlight. Greater Zion Fellowship was packed to capacity, 5,000 seats, filled with the elite of Atlanta. This was the epicenter of my mother's kingdom, a megachurch where high-fashion massive hats and the illusion of flawless black excellence reigned supreme. I slipped in through the grand sanctuary doors just as the massive choir finished their opening hymn. The cameras mounted on the walls swung to the pulpit. Beatrice stepped up to the clear acrylic podium, dabbing at her perfectly dry eyes with a laced handkerchief. She wore a tailored black morning suit and a wide-brimmed hat, playing the tragic, grieving widow to absolute perfection. My mother leaned into the microphone, her voice trembling with highly practiced sorrow. "Church family, I ask for your prayers today, not just for my late husband Arthur, but for my youngest daughter Maya. She has lost her way. She is troubled, wandering in a darkness of her own making. The stress of her rebellion weighed heavily on my Arthur's heart, and now her poor fiancé is fighting for his life due to her reckless instability." A collective theatrical gasp rippled through the congregation. The murmurs of judgment were deafening, a wave of self-righteous pity washing over the room. I did not hide in the back shadows. I stepped directly into the center aisle. I was not wearing black mourning clothes. I wore a sharp crimson-tailored blazer and matching trousers, my heels clicking loudly against the polished marble floor. Every single head in the sanctuary turned. Deacons shifted uncomfortably in their velvet seats. Victoria, sitting in the front pew in her designer morning dress, went completely rigid, her jaw dropping open. The head deacon, Brother Thomas, was passing the gold collection plates down the center row, completely frozen as I approached. He looked at me, his eyes darting toward the pulpit, unsure if he should call the massive security team or offer me a hymnal. I walked right up to him. I reached inside my crimson blazer, pulled out a certified cashier's check, and dropped it squarely into the velvet-lined plate. Brother Thomas glanced down. His eyes nearly bulged out of his head. $100,000. The amount was written clearly in bold black ink, drawn directly from my corporate cybersecurity account. The sum was large enough to fund the church's entire youth program for a year. Consider it a contribution to the truth. Brother Thomas, I said smoothly, my voice carrying just enough to reach the first few rows of the congregation. Victoria stared at the check, her face turning an ashen shade of gray. Up on the pulpit, my mother gripped the edges of the acrylic podium, her knuckles turning bone white. Her tragic performance was completely derailed by my absolute refusal to be shamed in her house. Beatrice signaled the head ushers with a sharp, furious jerk of her head. "Maya, meet me in the vestry immediately," she commanded through gritted teeth, stepping away from the podium and abandoning her sermon. I followed her orders, walking calmly behind the massive stage and into the private vestry room reserved for the pastoral staff and elite church leadership. The heavy oak doors shut solidly behind us, muting the booming sound of the choir starting their next worship song. The very moment the brass latch clicked, the tragic grieving widow vanished into thin air. Beatrice turned on me, her face contorted with pure, unfiltered hatred. "How dare you parade in here wearing red?" Beatrice hissed, storming toward me with her fists clenched. "You arrogant, ungrateful wretch! You come into my church after what you did to your father after putting Liam in the hospital and try to buy your way back into my good graces with a fake check." "The check is real, Mother," I replied, standing my ground, refusing to shrink back from her anger. "Just like the offshore bank accounts Preston uses to launder your stolen charity money. And do not dare talk to me about what happened to Dad. I cracked his encrypted hard drive last night. I read his entire private ledger. I know exactly how he died, and I know exactly who handed Victoria the poison to put in his tea." Beatrice flinched. A brilliant flash of genuine panic crossed her eyes before her rage masked it again. "You are insane," she spat, taking another step forward. "No one will believe a single word you say. I have this entire congregation in the palm of my hand. Liam's parents are pressing criminal charges against you today. By tomorrow morning, you will be locked in a psychiatric ward or a federal holding cell." "I am not going anywhere," I said, stepping closer to her, completely invading her space. "And I will leave this vestry the exact second you explain one simple detail to me. Why was Dad's $50 million life insurance policy suddenly altered to bypass the community charity completely? Why was it rerouted to deposit directly into your private individual bank account just 48 hours before his sudden heart attack?" The accusation hit her like a physical blow. Her eyes went wide, absolutely wild with the terrifying realization that her most guarded, horrific secret was completely exposed. In that moment, Beatrice lost all sense of self-preservation and control. "You worthless mistake!" Beatrice screamed, her voice cracking with fury. She raised her hand and struck me across the face with all the force she could possibly muster. The slap was blindingly hard, the sharp crack echoing loudly off the small room's holy walls, snapping my head to the side. "I will destroy you, Maya!" she shrieked, leaning in close, her chest heaving. "I will bury you right next to your miserable father if you ever speak of that insurance policy again. Do you hear me? I will end you." I slowly turned my head back to face her, a sharp, stinging sensation radiating across my cheek where her rings had cut my skin. I did not flinch. Instead, a cold, calculated smile spread across my face. I reached into the pocket of my crimson blazer and tapped a single button on the modified smartphone I had been holding the entire time. A custom frequency jammer and a highly illegal audio relay application. I looked up at the wireless microphone still securely clipped to my mother's silk lapel. "I hear you, Mother," I said, my voice eerily calm and steady. "And so does the rest of Atlanta." I pointed upward toward the sanctuary ceiling. The oak vestry doors were thick, but they were nowhere near thick enough to drown out the absolute horrified silence that had just fallen over the 5,000 people in the main hall. My digital override had forced the soundboard to broadcast the entire violent exchange. Every single threat, every mention of the stolen life insurance policy, and the echoing, violent crack of her hand against my face had just been broadcast directly through the church's massive surround sound speakers. The gasp from the congregation beyond the oak vestry doors was a physical wave of sound. I could hear the immediate eruption of chaos in the sanctuary. Deacons were shouting over each other. Choir members were screaming in absolute shock. The pristine, holy facade of the Vance family had just been shattered into a million irreparable pieces in front of 5,000 witnesses. I did not stay to watch my mother attempt to explain away her broadcasted confession. I pushed past her frozen, trembling figure, walked out the side exit of the church, and stepped into the blinding Atlanta sunlight. My phone was already buzzing with frantic calls from Victoria, but I blocked the number and slid into the back of my waiting car. "Take me to Atlanta General," I told my private driver, my voice hard and absolute. "Step on it." The adrenaline of exposing Beatrice fueled me, but Liam was my only true priority. I sprinted through the sliding glass doors of the intensive care unit, the sterile smell of bleach hitting my lungs. I marched directly toward Liam's room at the end of the hall, but my path was immediately blocked. Standing in front of his door like two expensive stone gargoyles were Richard and Eleanor Montgomery. Liam's wealthy conservative parents had arrived. My mother had clearly worked her toxic magic fast, calling them from the church earlier to spin her web of lies. Eleanor clutched her cashmere shawl, her eyes narrowing with absolute disgust the second she saw my crimson blazer. "Do not take another step toward our son, Maya," Eleanor commanded, her voice carrying the entitled weight of old money. "Your mother called us. She told us everything about your psychotic breakdown. You dragged our son into your ghetto family drama, and now he is fighting for his life. You are not going anywhere near him." I did not slow my pace. I walked right up to them, stopping inches from Richard's chest. "Move, Richard. I'm not playing country club politics with you today. You will address us with respect," Richard barked, signaling a nearby hospital security guard. "Officer, remove this woman. She is the reason my son is in a coma. She has a history of mental instability, and she is a danger to his recovery." I calmly reached into my leather tote bag and pulled out a thick, legally notarized folder. I slapped it directly onto the nurse's station counter right under the security guard nose. "That is a fully executed medical proxy and durable power of attorney," I stated, my voice echoing down the quiet corridor. "Liam signed it 6 months ago. It explicitly names me as his sole medical decision-maker. It supersedes his parents, his siblings, and anyone else Beatrice Vance decides to call. If you deny me entry to that room, I will have my corporate legal team own this hospital by tomorrow morning." The charge nurse reviewed the document, her eyes scanning the official state seals. She nodded at the guard. "Step down, officer. She has full legal authority." The Montgomerys looked like they had been physically struck. Eleanor opened her mouth to argue, her face turning a blotchy red, but I pushed right past her shoulder and shoved the heavy wooden door open, locking it firmly behind me. The rhythmic beeping of the heart monitor was the only sound in the dim room. I rushed to the bedside, grabbing Liam's cold, pale hand. The tubes were still taped to his face, but the harsh lines of pain around his eyes had softened. I leaned down, resting my forehead against his knuckles. "Liam, please," I whispered, the heavy weight in my chest finally fracturing. "You have to wake up. I cannot do this without you." A weak squeeze answered me. My head snapped up. Liam's eyelids fluttered, fighting against the harsh fluorescent lights. He groaned softly, turning his head toward me. "Maya," he rasped, his voice dry and gravelly. I hit the call button, frantically pouring a tiny cup of water and lifting the sponge to his cracked lips. "You are okay," I breathed out, wiping a tear from my cheek. "You are safe." "Victoria poisoned the vodka, Liam. She was trying to kill me because Dad found out she and Preston were embezzling from the mega church. Preston tried to attack me at my apartment to get the evidence." I expected Liam to look shocked or confused by the sheer volume of trauma I was unloading. Instead, the lingering fog of medication vanished from his eyes entirely. His posture shifted even against the hospital pillows. He reached up and pulled the oxygen cannula away from his nose, his demeanor completely changing from the laid-back independent IT consultant I had known for 2 years to someone remarkably sharp and dangerous. "Did Preston get the drive?" Liam asked, his voice suddenly steady and commanding. "Did he take your father ledger?" I froze the sponge, dropping back into the plastic cup. "How do you know about the ledger?" I asked, my heart hammering a new frantic rhythm. "I never told you about an encrypted drive." Liam struggled to sit up, ignoring the monitors pulling at his arms. "Maya, there is something I need to tell you. I am not an IT consultant. That was my cover. I am a federal investigator for the Financial Crimes Enforcement Network. We operate under the Treasury Department." I stared at him, the sterile room spinning slightly. "You are a federal agent. I have been undercover for 18 months, Liam explained, gripping my hand tightly. "My agency has been tracking a massive international money laundering ring operating out of Macau. 6 months ago, we traced a series of dark money wire transfers right back to Atlanta. Specifically, back to the Vance Megachurch Community Housing Project. Preston has been using the church tax-exempt status to clean millions of dollars in illegal offshore gambling debts. We knew he was doing it. We knew Victoria was signing the checks. But Preston is smart. He layered the shell companies so deep we could not secure a federal indictment without the original source documents. Your father caught them." Liam continued, his breathing shallow but urgent. "Arthur contacted my agency a month ago. He told us he had conducted a shadow audit of the church accounts and possessed irrefutable proof of Preston crimes. He promised to hand the evidence over to me personally. But 2 days before our scheduled meeting, he died of a sudden heart attack. I felt the blood drain from my face as the entire timeline locked into place. They killed him," I whispered, the horror washing over me. "They killed my father to stop him from handing you the audit." Liam nodded, his jaw set in a hard line. "We lost our only witness, Maya. We have been watching the church fund wait for a slip-up, but Preston is moving the money too fast. Without your father master ledger, my agency has no case. Preston is going to get away with murder and take the entire $50 million charity fund with him. Unless we find that drive, the trail is completely dead." I reached into the hidden lining of my leather tote bag. I pulled out the heavy matte black military-grade hard drive and set it firmly on Liam Hospital tray. "The trail is not dead," I said, a cold, fierce smile spreading across my face. "It is right here, and we are going to use it to burn their entire empire to the ground." Liam stared at the matte black hard drive resting on his hospital tray. The heavy machinery and tubes surrounding his bed suddenly seemed entirely irrelevant. He reached out with a pale but steady hand and traced the edge of the metal casing. He let out a sharp breath of disbelief. "Your father was a brilliant man, Maya. He knew exactly how to hide this from them and exactly who to trust it with." Before I could reply, a sharp rap echoed against the heavy wooden door of the ICU room. I tensed instinctively, moving to block the hard drive from view. Liam's parents were still out there, furious and demanding entry. But Liam simply pressed a sequence of numbers on his personal secure cell phone, which had been tucked under his pillow. "Let him in," Liam commanded. The door swung open. It was not Richard or Eleanor Montgomery. A tall, broad-shouldered man, wearing a pristine white doctor coat, stepped into the room. He closed the door quickly and locked the deadbolt behind him. He did not look like a standard hospital physician. His posture was rigid, his eyes scanning the room with tactical precision. He pulled a thick encrypted tablet from his pocket. "Maya. This is Dr. Eris," Liam said, nodding toward the man. "He is a senior medical examiner and forensic toxicologist attached to my federal unit. The moment I collapsed, my agency flagged the incident, and Dr. Eris intercepted my blood samples before the hospital lab could process them." Dr. Eris did not offer a polite greeting. He walked straight to the foot of Liam's bed and pulled up a highly detailed chemical analysis on his tablet. "We ran the specialized screen you requested, Agent Montgomery." Dr. Eris reported, his voice clinically detached. The standard hospital toxicology panels came back completely clean, just as we suspected. They were looking for the usual suspects: roofies, fentanyl-heavy sedatives, or street narcotics. They found absolutely nothing. I felt a cold knot form in my stomach. Then why did his heart stop? Because the substance in that vintage vodka was not designed to sedate him, Dr. Eris explained, turning the tablet so I could see the complex molecular structures glowing on the screen. It was a highly synthesized digitalis derivative. It is an extremely rare, untraceable compound specifically engineered to force a massive rapid cardiac arrest. It binds directly to the heart muscle receptors, overloads the electrical system, and then completely dissipates from the bloodstream within 4 hours. If I had not intercepted the blood work during that exact 4-hour window, Liam medical chart would forever state he suffered a spontaneous idiopathic heart attack. The words hung in the sterile hospital air. Spontaneous heart attack. I took a slow step backward away from the bed. The sterile white walls of the ICU seemed to close in around me. My breathing grew shallow as the horrific pieces of this puzzle finally slammed together. "Dad did not die of a heart attack," I whispered, my voice trembling with absolute horrifying clarity. Liam looked at me, his federal agent persona softening into deep, genuine concern. "Maya." "No, you do not understand," I said, my voice growing louder, sharper as the profound evil of my own family revealed itself. Dad was perfectly healthy. He ran 3 miles a day. He had zero history of cardiac issues. But 3 weeks ago, he dropped dead in his study. The coroner said it was a massive spontaneous myocardial infarction. They told me it was just a tragic natural event, but it was not natural. I paced across the room, my mind racing with terrifying speed. 2 days before Dad died, Beatrice changed his $50 million life insurance policy. She rerouted the entire payout to bypass the church charity fund and deposit directly into her private offshore accounts. And that same week, Dad finished the shadow audit on Preston and Victoria. He was preparing to hand this exact hard drive over to the federal authorities. He was going to expose them all. I turned back to face Liam and Dr. Eris. Victoria and my mother murdered him. They slipped this exact same untraceable compound into his evening tea to stop him from exposing their embezzlement. They murdered my father. And when they realized I held the key to the safety deposit box, they handed me that poisoned vodka to silence me too. The silence in the room was deafening. Dr. Aris lowered his tablet, his jaw clenched in professional disgust. Liam pushed himself up higher against the pillows, his eyes burning with cold federal fury. "My unit is officially opening a homicide investigation today," Liam stated, his voice dropping into a dangerous, commanding register. "We have the hard drive, Maya. We have the absolute proof of the $50 million fraud. We can easily prove motive. We can freeze their assets within the hour and drag Preston and Victoria out of that mega church in handcuffs for financial crimes." But Liam hesitated, frustration flashing across his face. "But what?" I demanded, gripping the edge of his bed. "Financial crimes are a paper trail," Liam explained. "Murder is entirely different. This compound is designed specifically to be untraceable after death. Your father was buried 48 hours ago. Even with an exhumation, we will not find the chemical in his tissue. Without physical evidence tying Beatrice or Victoria directly to the poison, a high-priced defense attorney will create reasonable doubt. They will claim your father's death was a tragic coincidence, and that I suffered a random medical emergency. They will get away with murder," I said, the bitter taste of defeat rising in my throat. "Not if we get a confession," Liam countered, his eyes locking onto mine. "We need them to admit it on record. We need Beatrice or Victoria to explicitly state they administered the compound. But Beatrice is a master manipulator. If we bring her into an interrogation room, she will immediately invoke her right to counsel and shut down completely. We cannot corner her in a traditional setting." I stared at the black hard drive. I thought about my mother standing at the pulpit, basking in the adoration of 5,000 people playing the tragic Holy Widow while her husband's blood stained her designer clothes. I thought about Victoria sneering at me across the mahogany conference table, believing she was utterly untouchable. "They are narcissists," I said, my voice deadly calm. They do not fear the law because they believe they are entirely above it. They believe their wealth and their social status make them invincible, but their egos are incredibly fragile. Liam watched me closely. What are you thinking, Maya? The Arthur Vance Memorial Gala is tomorrow night. I said, a fierce, calculated strategy forming in my mind. It is the biggest charity event of the decade. The governor, the mayor, and every wealthy elite in Atlanta will be sitting in that ballroom. Beatrice is expecting to be crowned the queen of the city. She is expecting absolute worship. I picked up the hard drive and dropped it back into my tote bag. You cannot break Beatrice Vance in a quiet police interrogation room, Liam. But if you back a narcissist into a corner in front of 1,000 cameras and threaten to take away their crown, they will lose all rational control. They will snap. I know exactly how to make my mother confess to murder. I just need to push her ego to the absolute breaking point in front of the entire city. The trap required me to do the one thing I had spent my entire life refusing to do. I had to beg. I left Liam in the secure care of his federal medical team and drove straight back to my off-the-grid office. I swapped my crimson blazer for an oversized, wrinkled trench coat. I scrubbed my face raw, leaving my skin blotchy and my eyes deliberately bloodshot. I needed to look like a woman who had just realized she was entirely out of her depth and completely out of options. I needed to look like prey. I called my mother personal assistant and pleaded for exactly 5 minutes of her time. I was told to arrive at the Buckhead estate at noon and use the service entrance. When I finally walked into the sprawling marble foyer of my childhood home, I was forced to wait for 2 agonizing hours. It was a classic power play. Beatrice and Victoria were making me stand near the kitchen doors like a disgraced employee, while they enjoyed their catered lunch in the formal dining room. I kept my head down, clutching a battered canvas bag tight against my chest, letting my shoulders slump. Every passing housekeeper and security guard shot me looks of intense pity. Finally, the heavy oak doors of the drawing room swung open. My mother's assistant coldly motioned for me to enter. Beatrice and Victoria were seated on the custom white silk sofas, sipping sparkling water from crystal flutes. They both wore immaculate designer day dresses, looking as though they did not have a single care in the world. They looked entirely untouched by the fact that they had murdered a man just 3 weeks prior. Victoria took one look at my disheveled appearance and let out a sharp, cruel laugh. "Look at you, Maya. You look absolutely pathetic. I suppose playing the tough independent tech CEO is not as easy when you have a homicide detective breathing down your neck." I forced my voice to tremble. I let my hands shake visibly as I pulled the trench coat tighter around myself. "The police were at the hospital," I stammered, staring at the plush Persian rug beneath my feet. "Liam's parents hired a former state prosecutor. They are pressing attempted murder charges against me today. They think I poisoned him. They think I am crazy." "You are crazy!" Victoria shot back, leaning forward with a vicious, triumphant smile. "You barged into the lawyer office, waving around a rusty key and spouting insane conspiracy theories about Preston. You humiliated Mother in front of the entire church. And now you are facing decades in a federal prison. You brought this entirely on yourself." I turned to Beatrice, letting genuine tears of frustration well up in my eyes. The frustration was real, but it was born from the sheer effort it took not to lunge across the coffee table and strangle her. "Mother, please," I whispered, my voice cracking perfectly. "My accounts are frozen. My investors are pulling out because of the scandal. I have absolutely no money for a defense attorney. Liam's parents are going to bury me. I need your help." Beatrice slowly set her crystal flute down on the glass table. She looked at me with an expression of pure, unadulterated disgust. She was drinking in my despair, letting it feed her monumental ego. "You dare come into my home and ask for my money?" Beatrice asked, her voice dripping with venom. "After you threatened me, after you tried to ruin the pristine legacy your father built. You are a toxic stain on this family, Maya. You always have been." I lowered my head, forcing a sob to escape my throat. I was wrong. I was just grieving. I was confused. "Please, Mother, I do not want to go to prison." Beatrice exchanged a long, calculated look with Victoria. Victoria nodded, sliding a thick manila folder across the glass coffee table toward me. "We are not monsters," Beatrice said smoothly, leaning back into the silk cushions. We do not want the press reporting that a member of the Vance family is relying on a cheap public defender. It would be an embarrassment. So I have had my attorneys draft a simple agreement. I reached out with trembling fingers and opened the folder. It contained 2 documents. The first was an ironclad non-disclosure agreement carrying devastating financial penalties if I ever spoke about my father, his death, or the church finances to anyone, including law enforcement. The second document was a formal legal renunciation of the Vance family name and an absolute surrender of any residual claims to the estate. Sign the papers, Beatrice commanded, pointing a manicured finger at the signature lines. You will legally sever all ties to us. You will never set foot in Atlanta again. In exchange, I will quietly wire your attorney $200,000 to handle the Montgomery family and keep you out of a maximum security cell. It is a generous offer, Victoria chimed in, pouring herself another glass of water. Take the money and vanish, Maya. It is the only way you survive this. I stared at the pages, pretending to hesitate. I let my hands shake so badly the pen rattled against the glass table. But Mother, I whispered, looking up at her with wide, terrified eyes. This means I have no family left. It means I have nothing. Beatrice leaned forward, her eyes cold and dead. Let us be entirely clear, Maya. You never had a family. You were always a mistake. Your father only kept you around out of pity, because he felt responsible for your pathetic lack of ambition. You are nothing to me. Now sign the damn papers and get out of my sight. I let one final fake tear track down my cheek. I picked up the pen and signed my name on both documents. My signature was perfectly legible, legally binding, and entirely worthless. Excellent, Beatrice said, snatching the folder away the second my pen lifted from the page. My assistant will escort you out. Do not ever contact us again. I stood up, keeping my head bowed. I turned and walked out of the drawing room, allowing the heavy oak doors to slam shut behind me. I kept the trembling, defeated posture all the way through the marble foyer, down the front steps, and out the sprawling iron gates of the estate. But the absolute second I stepped inside my waiting car, the entire act dropped. I wiped the fake tears from my cheeks with the back of my sleeve. My spine straightened. My breathing slowed, returning to a steady, calculated rhythm. I reached into the pocket of my trench coat and pulled out a sterile burner phone Liam Federal Team had provided me earlier that morning. I dialed a secure international number. It rang twice before my lead financial operative answered. The bait is set, I said, my voice razor-sharp, completely devoid of the pathetic desperation I had just performed. Beatrice and Victoria think they have completely neutralized me. They are entirely focused on celebrating their victory. Are we clear to execute the acquisition? The operative asked, the sound of rapid typing echoing through the receiver. We are clear, I confirmed, pulling up a mirrored display of the financial markets on my secondary tablet. Victoria thought she had inherited a pristine $50 million downtown commercial real estate portfolio. What she did not know was that Preston had secretly leveraged every single one of those buildings, using them as collateral for massive high-interest loans to cover his offshore gambling debts. The loans were actively defaulting. The properties were in the final stages of secret foreclosure. And using the capital from my cybersecurity firm, heavily shielded by a maze of blind trusts, I was currently buying that exact bank. Execute the hostile takeover, I commanded, watching the green acquisition bars flood my tablet screen. Buy the debt. Buy the bank. Buy every single mortgage tied to the Vance real estate portfolio. Consider it done, the operative replied. I ended the call and tossed the burner phone onto the leather seat. I looked out the tinted window back toward the sprawling Buckhead estate. Beatrice thought she had severed my ties to the family. She thought she had stripped me of my power. But by tomorrow morning she would wake up to find out that her rejected runaway daughter was now the sole owner of everything she claimed to possess. The sleek black car pulled away from the sprawling iron gates of the Buckhead estate. I did not look back at the mansion. I wiped the remaining fake tears from my face and took a slow, deep breath, steadying my heart rate. I had exactly 48 hours until the Arthur Vance Memorial Gala. 48 hours to lay the physical traps to complement the massive financial snare I had just triggered. Beatrice and Victoria had been planning this gala for weeks. They were using it as a glittering distraction to mask their frantic embezzlement, cover up with a sickening display of high society pageantry. Billed as the absolute pinnacle of Atlanta Black excellence, the event was designed to be a public coronation. 1,000 elite guests, powerful politicians, and prominent media outlets were invited to ostensibly honor my late father and his charitable works. But the true purpose of the night was the grand announcement of Preston officially taking the helm of the Vance Mega Church Community Fund. They were going to parade his thievery under the guise of holy charity, and they expected the entire city to applaud them for it. I could not just walk into the Sovereign Grand Ballroom and start yelling accusations at the podium. They would have me dragged out by their private security and labeled a hysterical grieving outcast. I needed absolute total control over the entire environment. I needed to own the stage they were about to step onto. I drove straight to my off-the-grid office and brought up the logistics manifest for the gala. My father had kept meticulous records of the event planning, and my corporate team quickly identified every single vendor contracted for the evening. I started with the venue itself. The Sovereign Grand Management Group was heavily leveraged, carrying millions in toxic commercial debt. I instructed my operative to purchase a controlling share of their holding company through a blind trust. I paid a premium to expedite the paperwork. Within 4 hours, the transaction cleared. I technically owned the lease on the ballroom. Next was the luxury catering company, providing the 5-course dinner and the premium bar service. I offered a massive non-refundable cash buyout of their parent company using a subsidiary LLC. The owners accepted the wire transfer before dinner time, granting me full authority over their staffing roster for the weekend. But the most critical piece of my trap was the audiovisual production team. They held the keys to the kingdom. I did not just buy their company. I completely gutted and replaced their lead technicians. I pulled in my own elite cybersecurity contractors, dressing them as standard roadies and sound engineers. They seamlessly infiltrated the venue prep, taking over the soundboards, the lighting rigs, and the master projection booths without raising a single red flag. I spent the entire night before the gala hidden in the catwalks, high above the Sovereign Grand Ballroom. The space below was sickeningly opulent. Massive crystal chandeliers hung over tables draped in black velvet. Giant silk banners featuring my father face alongside Preston's arrogant smirk lined the walls. I ignored the decor and focused entirely on the wiring. I bypassed their standard digital interface and hardwired my encrypted laptop directly into the main server rack. Every massive LED screen, every lapel microphone, every spotlight, and every surround sound speaker in that room was now a puppet on my digital strings. Beatrice thought she was going to control the narrative and bask in the adoration of the city. She had absolutely no idea she was stepping onto a stage I had entirely rigged to destroy her. By dawn, the setup was completely finished. I sat in a darkened private suite overlooking the ballroom, my fingers resting on the master control console. The secure burner phone buzzed on the desk. It was Liam calling from his hospital bed. His federal medical team had cleared him for remote command, and he was monitoring the operation through an encrypted feed. The audiovisual back door is secure. I reported watching my contractors make their final adjustments on the floor below. I have total system override. My team is in place. Liam replied, his voice sharp and intensely focused. FinCN agents are currently disguised as catering staff, valet drivers, and lobby security. The moment you force the confession, we lock down the exits. Nobody leaves that ballroom until Preston and Victoria are in federal custody. We ended the call just as the sun began to rise over the city. The trap was perfectly synchronized. All I had to do was wait for the rats to walk blindly into it. At exactly 3 o'clock in the afternoon, my personal cell phone lit up. It was a text message from Victoria. I opened the message. It was a high-resolution selfie of my sister standing in her lavish dressing room getting ready for the gala. She was wearing a stunning emerald green gown, but my eyes immediately locked onto her neck. She was wearing our late grandmother flawless vintage diamond choker. Those diamonds were a sacred family heirloom specifically promised to me before my grandmother passed away. Victoria had stolen them from the estate vault just to twist the knife. Below the picture, Victoria had typed a caption dripping with venomous arrogance. Getting ready to honor Dad tonight. I am making sure the Vance legacy shines brighter than ever. It is just too bad you threw away your inheritance, Maya. You cannot even afford a ticket to watch us take over the city. You should have stayed in your place. I stared at the screen, a slow, fierce smile spreading across my face. She truly believed her own delusions. She believed her stolen wealth made her an untouchable queen. She believed I was broken and hiding in the shadows. I typed my response, my thumbs flying across the glass screen with cold, absolute certainty. I do not need a ticket to a building I own. Enjoy the diamonds, Victoria. They will look fantastic in your mugshot. I watched the tiny read receipt indicator appear beneath my text message. I did not wait for Victoria to formulate her frantic reply. I simply powered down the burner phone and turned my attention to the secondary monitor glowing brightly on my console. The gala tonight was the main event, but I had scheduled a devastating appetizer for my mother earlier this afternoon. Beatrice was desperate for liquid cash. The church embezzlement scheme was highly lucrative, but the stolen funds were entirely tied up in Preston offshore shell companies and heavily leveraged commercial real estate. With the federal authorities circling and the church shadow audit looming, Beatrice needed untraceable capital to secure her escape route. She had quietly listed the sprawling Buckhead mansion in a private off-market sale, demanding an expedited closing. The closing was scheduled for exactly 1 o'clock today. Beatrice and Preston were currently sitting in the formal dining room of the estate expecting a proxy representative for a nameless foreign investment group. They were expecting a massive wire transfer to clear their immediate financial hurdles. They were absolutely not expecting Marcus Sterling. Marcus was my lead corporate attorney. He was a shark in a tailored suit famous in Atlanta for dismantling corporate empires with a polite smile and a lethal briefcase. Through a discreet audio feed I had established earlier in the mansion security system, I listened as the heavy mahogany doors of the dining room swung open. "You are late," Beatrice snapped, her voice echoing through the feed. "I explicitly told the broker this transaction required absolute punctuality. We have a highly publicized gala to prepare for this evening." "My apologies," Mrs. Vance Marcus replied, his tone smooth and entirely unbothered. "Traffic in Buckhead is always unpredictable. I have the final execution documents right here." I heard the sound of a heavy leather briefcase being set onto the glass dining table. "Let us get this over with," Preston said impatiently. "The wire transfer routing numbers are on the second page. Your client Zenith Holdings agreed to waive the standard inspection contingencies for a rapid close. I assume the funds are prepared for immediate release. There is a slight correction regarding the buyer." Marcus said, the sound of shuffling papers echoing through my headset. Zenith Holdings was merely a temporary purchasing vehicle. The actual acquiring entity is Apex Cyber. I heard a sharp pause. "What is Apex Cyber?" Preston demanded, his voice dropping into a suspicious register. "I did not authorize a change in the purchasing entity. I demand to know who is signing this contract." Marcus let out a dry, amused chuckle. "That is the beauty of this specific transaction, Mr. Vance. Nobody is signing a purchase contract today. We are not here to buy the house. We already own it." "Excuse me," Beatrice practically shrieked. "You are sitting in my home. My husband built this estate. You will hand over the purchasing agreement, or I will have my private security throw you onto the street." Marcus did not flinch. He simply slid a thick stack of legally notarized documents across the table. "You do not own this home, Mrs. Vance. You have not owned it since you missed the second balloon payment on the highly toxic mezzanine loans your son-in-law brokered 6 months ago." I watched the audio waveform spike on my monitor as Preston let out a choked gasp. "You leveraged my house!" Beatrice screamed, her voice cracking with sheer outrage. "Preston, what is he talking about? You told me the property was entirely unencumbered." Preston stammered desperately, trying to regain control of the narrative. "Beatrice, it was a temporary liquidity measure. I needed collateral to cover a sudden margin call on the commercial real estate portfolio. I was going to pay it back before the church audit. This man is bluffing. You cannot orchestrate a hostile takeover of private residential debt without formal written notification. Actually, I can, Marcus countered, pulling a specific legal clause from the stack. You waived the notification rights when you routed the collateral through a blind shell company to hide the transaction from the church board of directors. You created a massive vulnerability, Preston, and my client just absorbed your entire debt portfolio. Every single defaulted mortgage, every toxic loan, and every leveraged asset tied to the Vance name now belongs to Apex Cyber. Who is your client? Beatrice demanded, her voice trembling with a mixture of absolute fury and sudden paralyzing terror. Who is running Apex Cyber? Marcus tapped the signature line on the foreclosure execution document. I suggest you read the bottom line, Mrs. Vance. The silence that followed was the sweetest sound I had ever heard. I could picture my mother staring at the ink on the page, her pristine, arrogant facade shattering into a million irreparable pieces as she read my name. Beatrice whispered the word, sounding like a curse. This is impossible. She is broke. She was just here begging for her legal fees. She signed a renunciation agreement. She signed a worthless piece of paper to keep you distracted, Marcus corrected smoothly. Maya Vance is the sole proprietor of Apex Cyber. She possesses the master ledger proving you and Preston embezzled $50 million from the charity fund. She bought your debt for pennies on the dollar because your financial empire is a complete illusion. You are currently trespassing on her private property. Technically speaking, Mrs. Vance, you are squatting. I am calling the police, Beatrice yelled. I will have her arrested for fraud. Please do, Marcus offered, extending his hands. I am sure the federal authorities would love to discuss the digitalis compound found in your late husband toxicology report. I believe the homicide detectives are very eager to speak with you. Preston did not wait to hear another word. I heard the sudden frantic scraping of a chair being pushed back. Preston was running. He sprinted out of the dining room, his heavy footsteps pounding against the hardwood floors. He rushed down the hallway and slammed the door to his private study, locking the deadbolt behind him. He realized the entire house of cards was collapsing right on top of him. If I had the debt portfolio and the master ledger, I had the trail to his offshore accounts. Through the network back door I had installed in the estate router, I watched Preston frantically wake up his secure laptop. He bypassed the firewall and initiated a highly encrypted connection to his private banking portal in the Cayman Islands. This was his ultimate failsafe. He was trying to wire the $50 million in stolen charity funds to an untraceable cryptocurrency wallet in Eastern Europe, so he could flee the country before the gala even started. His hands must have been shaking violently as he typed in the complex alphanumeric passwords. The screen prompted him for a biometric fingerprint scan. He pressed his thumb to the reader. The loading icons spun on the screen, accessing the offshore servers, verifying the routing numbers, and connecting to the master vault. Preston let out a ragged breath of anticipation, waiting for the massive fortune to appear on the screen. The page loaded. The final account summary flashed in bright, bold lettering. Preston stared at the screen, his heart completely stopping in his chest. He hit the refresh button, frantically slapping the keyboard. The numbers did not change. I had already used the master ledger to trace the exact routing protocols. I did not just freeze his accounts, I drained them. The offshore balance read exactly $0. Preston slammed his hand against the mahogany desk. The sharp crack echoed like a gunshot in the confined space of the study. He hit the refresh key again, his breathing turning shallow and erratic. He typed in the secondary routing numbers, his fingers slipping over the slick keys. 0. It was all gone. The $50 million he had painstakingly laundered through Macau, the massive safety net he had built by bleeding the church charity dry, had completely evaporated. Maya had not just bought his debt, she and Liam Federal Unit had digitally infiltrated his impenetrable Cayman vault and burned it to the ground. He was a dead man. The FBI would not just freeze his accounts, they would trace the digital forced entry back to the original source documents. They had the master ledger. They had the motive. And now he did not even have the cash to buy a fake passport or charter a private flight out of Atlanta. Preston shoved the laptop off the desk. It hit the floor with a sickening crunch. He sprinted to the hidden wall safe behind the oil painting of the Vance family crest. He spun the dial, his breath coming in ragged, panicked gasps. He pulled open the heavy steel door and grabbed his emergency go-bag. He began frantically tossing in whatever physical assets remained. Bundles of emergency cash, 4 vintage Rolex watches, his secondary untraceable cell phone. The heavy study door swung open. Victoria stood in the doorway entirely oblivious to the catastrophic reality crashing down around them. She was already dressed in her emerald green gala gown. The stolen vintage diamonds glittered mockingly around her neck. Her face was contoured to absolute perfection, her expression twisted into a sneer of profound irritation. "What on earth are you doing, Preston?" she demanded, her voice sharp and entitled. "My mother is having a complete nervous breakdown in the drawing room because some arrogant attorney claims Maya bought our debt. You need to call the bank and fix whatever clerical error you made. I am not going to let Maya ruin my gala tonight." Preston stopped packing. He slowly turned to face his wife. The look of manic terror in his eyes finally made Victoria step backward. "There is no clerical error," Victoria Preston hissed, his voice trembling with a terrifying, desperate edge. "Your sister took everything. We need to run." Victoria crossed her arms, refusing to let her pristine reality crack. "That is impossible. You told me the offshore accounts were untouchable. You said we were liquid for 50 million. "I was wrong," Preston shouted, hurling a velvet watch box into the duffel bag. "Her federal agent boyfriend hacked the Cayman vault." "The money is gone, Victoria. The church charity fund is gone. The house belongs to your sister. We have absolutely nothing left. We need to run right now before the feds surround this estate." Victoria let out a harsh, dismissive laugh. "Run? Are you completely insane? I am Victoria Vance. I am the face of this city. I am hosting the memorial gala in exactly 3 hours. I am not running anywhere like a common criminal just because you mismanaged some real estate loans. We will hire better lawyers. We will tie Maya up in litigation for the next decade." Preston crossed the room and grabbed her violently by the shoulders of her designer gown. "There are no lawyers, Victoria. There is no gala. Do you not understand what is happening? Maya has the master ledger. She gave it to the federal authorities. They are not coming for a civil suit over bad loans. They are coming with federal indictment warrants for massive financial fraud." Victoria wrenched herself out of his grip, smoothing the silk fabric of her dress. "Let them come," she sneered, her narcissism completely blinding her to the danger. "Embezzlement is a white-collar crime, Preston. I will simply claim ignorance. I will tell the authorities that my husband handled all the finances and betrayed my trust. I will play the victim. The city will eat it up. You will take the fall, and I will keep my reputation." Preston stared at her. His chest heaved as the sheer sociopathic depth of his wife finally registered. He let out a harsh, breathless sound that was half laugh and half sob. "You think you can play the victim?" Preston screamed, the veins in his neck bulging. "You think the FBI is going to care about white-collar embezzlement when they pull your father toxicology report?" Victoria froze. The color instantly drained from her perfectly manicured face. "What are you talking about?" Maya knows, Preston roared, his voice echoing off the high ceilings of the study. "She knows about the Digitalis compound. She knows he did not have a spontaneous heart attack. Embezzlement is white-collar, Victoria. But you committed murder. I did not slip the poison into your father's drink, you did. You and your mother." "You shut your mouth!" Victoria hissed, lunging forward to cover his face with her hand. Her eyes were wide with sudden primal panic. "If you ever say that again, I swear I will kill you too." Preston shoved her away, grabbing the duffel bag and throwing its strap over his shoulder. "I am not going down for capital murder because you two psychopathic women could not wait for your inheritance. You are entirely on your own, Victoria." He pushed past her, leaving her standing in the center of the study, clutching the stolen diamonds at her throat. High above the sovereign grand ballroom, I sat in the darkened private suite. The glow of the master console illuminated the fierce, hard lines of my face. I had my headphones pressed tightly against my ears. Beside me, Liam watched the audio waveforms spike wildly on my secondary monitor. When I orchestrated the hostile takeover of the Vance Estate debt portfolio through Apex Cyber, I acquired total legal ownership of the physical property. And as the new legal owner, I had immediately authorized my cybersecurity team to activate the dormant diagnostic microphones embedded within the mansion integrated smart home system. Every single room in that house had been quietly listening. The high-definition audio recording had captured every single agonizing second of their screaming match. It had captured Victoria's absolute refusal to run. It had captured Preston's sheer panic. And most importantly, it had captured the exact specific confession we needed. I slowly reached out and hit the save button on the console. The encrypted file immediately backed up to 3 secure federal servers. I pulled the headphones down, allowing them to rest around my neck. I turned to look at Liam. His federal agent persona was locked in tight, his jaw set with professional satisfaction. "We got it," I whispered, my voice cold and absolute. "We have the confession on tape." Liam nodded, pulling his sidearm from his shoulder holster and checking the magazine. "It is perfectly admissible, Maya. It is a recorded conversation captured on hardware situated within property you legally own. There is no expectation of privacy. They just handed us the entire case on a silver platter." I stood up from the console, smoothing out the front of my black evening gown. "The gala is starting in exactly 2 hours," I said, looking out the reinforced glass window at the opulent ballroom below. "Beatrice and Victoria think they are walking into a coronation, but they are walking directly into their own execution." The path to this moment had been paved with their sheer unadulterated panic. As I looked out over the opulent ballroom preparing for the evening trap, my mind flashed back to the events of earlier today. The foundation of Victoria's pristine reality had not just cracked this morning, it had completely shattered. I knew exactly when it happened because my encrypted tablet had alerted me to the transaction failure. At 9 o'clock this morning, Victoria had been expecting the final delivery of her custom Parisian evening gown for the memorial gala. The dress was a heavily beaded masterpiece that she had commissioned months ago, specifically designed to ensure all eyes remained firmly on her. But when the exclusive courier arrived at her penthouse suite, demanding the final $80,000 payment upon delivery, her platinum credit card was instantly declined. I had been listening to the audio feed from her smart home system when the courier politely asked for another form of payment. Victoria had thrown an absolute tantrum. She screamed at the courier, calling him incompetent before frantically dialing Beatrice. "Mother, my card is not working!" Victoria shrieked into the phone, her voice echoing through my headset. "Call the bank immediately. Fix this clerical error." "The courier is standing in my foyer, refusing to hand over the garment. I need that dress for tonight." Beatrice was already suffocating under the weight of Marcus Sterling, hostile real estate takeover. "I do not have time for your wardrobe issues," Beatrice snapped back. "My personal accounts are completely frozen. That wretched sister of yours bought all of our residential debt. We have absolutely no liquid cash." "Then pull it from the church," Victoria demanded callously, entirely ignoring the severity of their financial ruin. "Transfer $100,000 from the community housing fund. Nobody is going to notice a minor withdrawal today. Just wire the money so I can get this man out of my penthouse." Through the audio feed, I heard the frantic clicking of Beatrice logging into the megachurch master charity fund. I knew exactly what she was about to see. She was expecting the usual $50 million balance. Instead, Beatrice was greeted by a stark, unyielding black and white screen. The Financial Crimes Enforcement Network had executed a blanket federal injunction at dawn. Every single cent tied to the Vance megachurch was entirely frozen pending an active homicide and embezzlement investigation. They had absolutely zero liquidity. They were officially broke. The realization must have hit Victoria like a physical blow, because her immediate response was to abandon every ounce of her fabricated pride. The sheer terror of looking poor in front of the Atlanta elite drove her to do the unthinkable. 2 hours later, a frantic pounding echoed through my downtown apartment. I had returned home briefly to shower and change into my evening gown before heading to the Sovereign Grand. Liam had been quietly discharged from the hospital at dawn. His federal medical team had secretly relocated him to my apartment, transforming my master bedroom into a secure remote command center so he could monitor the gala operation safely. I walked to the front door and pulled it open. Victoria stood in my hallway looking absolutely unhinged. The polished, untouchable socialite was completely gone. Her designer clothes looked rumpled, her hair was pulled back into a messy knot, and her eyes were wild with desperate manic energy. She pushed past me into my living room without waiting for an invitation, her eyes darting around the space. "Maya, you have to help me," Victoria pleaded, dropping her arrogant act entirely. Her voice trembled with raw desperation. "Mother told me about your corporate attorney. She told me you own Apex Cyber. You bought all of our debt. You have millions in liquidity, Maya. You have to give me a loan. Just 100,000. I will pay you back, I swear." I stood near the kitchen island, crossing my arms over my chest. I watched my sister unravel, completely devoid of pity. "You barged into my home to beg for money so you can buy a dress," I stated, my voice flat and dead. "You are currently facing federal foreclosure, and your biggest concern is what you are going to wear to a party." "It is not just a party," Victoria screamed, her voice cracking. "It is the memorial gala. The governor is going to be there. The national press is going to be there. I cannot walk into that ballroom wearing something off the rack. I am Victoria Vance. I am the face of this family." "You are a fraud, Victoria," I replied coldly. "You and Mother have been bleeding Dad charity dry to fund your lavish lifestyle, and now the money is gone. I am not giving you a single dime to uphold your pathetic illusion." Victoria rushed forward, grabbing the edge of the kitchen counter. Her eyes begged me silently. She was utilizing the one weapon she thought still held any power over me. She was trying to play the sister card. "We are blood, Maya," Victoria cried out, genuine tears of absolute panic spilling down her cheeks. "You cannot do this to me. You cannot let me look poor tonight. Please. I am your sister." I did not flinch. I did not move. I looked directly into her terrified eyes and let the absolute truth destroy her final line of defense. "Blood did not stop you from handing me a poisoned bottle of vodka," I said, my voice dropping to a deadly whisper. Victoria froze. The tears instantly stopped flowing. The color drained from her face, leaving her skin a sickly ash gray. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. She realized in that exact horrifying second that I knew everything. I knew about the embezzlement. I knew about the Digitalis compound. I knew she and my mother had murdered our father in cold blood. The narcissism completely shattered. The desperation instantly twisted into violent primal rage. "You little witch!" Victoria snarled, her face contorting into something demonic. "You ruined everything." With a sudden vicious shriek, Victoria grabbed a heavy crystal vase resting on the entryway console table. She hoisted it high above her head, lunging forward to smash it directly into my skull. I braced myself, ready to deflect the blow, but I did not have to. The heavy wooden door of my bedroom swung open. Victoria froze mid-strike, the heavy crystal vase trembling in her elevated hands. Liam stepped out into the hallway. He did not look like the weak, recovering IT consultant she remembered from the hospital. His posture was rigid and completely commanding. His suit jacket was pushed back, revealing the dark leather holster of his service weapon. In his right hand, he held up his gold Federal Investigator badge, the seal of the United States Treasury catching the overhead light. "Drop the vase, Victoria," Liam commanded, his voice echoing with absolute federal authority. Victoria let out a breathless, terrified gasp. The crystal vase slipped from her fingers and crashed onto the hardwood floor, shattering into dozens of sharp, jagged pieces. She did not say a single word. She spun around on her heels and sprinted out the front door, fleeing down the hallway like a hunted animal. I listened to the frantic clicking of Victoria designer heels echoing down the corridor until the elevator doors chimed shut. The silence that fell over my apartment was absolute and deeply satisfying. Liam holstered his weapon and gave me a curt, professional nod, stepping back into the master bedroom to resume monitoring the digital feeds. The trap was perfectly set, and the rats were currently scattering in blind, predictable panic. I grabbed my evening clutch and my secure laptop, heading out the door without a backward glance. The Arthur Vance Memorial Gala was scheduled to begin at 8 o'clock at the Sovereign Grand Hotel, and I needed to be on site to manage the final audiovisual overrides. I drove through the bustling Atlanta traffic with a cold mechanical focus. The Sovereign Grand Lobby was a chaotic symphony of event planners, florists, and caterers rushing to finalize the opulent displays. Giant floral arrangements of white lilies flanked the grand sweeping staircase. Waitstaff in crisp tuxedos hurried past, carrying trays of crystal champagne flutes. I bypassed the main reception desk and headed straight for the private VIP elevators, keeping my head down to avoid the lingering press photographers already setting up their equipment near the red carpet. A sharp manicured hand clamped down hard on my forearm. I stopped dead in my tracks and slowly turned around. Beatrice stood there, physically blocking my path to the elevators. My mother looked immaculate in a black velvet evening gown dripping in expensive diamonds. Her hair was styled into a flawless updo, and her makeup was meticulously applied to hide the exhaustion. But the veins pulsing angrily at her temples and the rigid, tight set of her jaw betrayed the sheer panic boiling underneath her aristocratic facade. She pulled me roughly toward a secluded alcove behind a massive marble pillar, shielding us from the prying eyes of the hotel staff and the arriving guests. "You psychotic little brat," Beatrice hissed, her voice dripping with concentrated venom. "Victoria just called me sobbing hysterically from her car. She said you attacked her in your apartment. She said you tried to assault her with a weapon." I stared at my mother, completely unbothered by her desperate, fabricated narrative. Victoria picked up a crystal vase to cave my head in. I corrected smoothly, my voice devoid of any emotion, and she dropped it the second a federal investigator walked out of my bedroom. "Your golden child is unraveling, mother. And so is your bank account." Beatrice gripped her designer clutch so tightly her knuckles turned white against the black leather. "You think you are so clever, Maya. You think buying up our residential debt makes you some kind of untouchable mastermind. You are nothing but a bitter, jealous outcast, trying to destroy the people who gave you everything. If you do not reverse this hostile corporate takeover immediately, I am going straight to the National Press Corps, arriving for the gala tonight." I crossed my arms, waiting for her ultimate threat to materialize. "I will tell them you are mentally unfit," Beatrice sneered, taking a step into my personal space to intimidate me. "I will tell the reporters that the grief over your father passing triggered a severe psychotic break. I will provide fabricated medical records to my media contacts if I have to. I will parade Victoria in front of the cameras and tell the world that my estranged, unstable daughter violently assaulted her own sister in a fit of manic jealousy." She paused, letting the venomous words hang in the air between us. "How long do you think Apex Cyber will survive when its CEO is publicly branded as a violent lunatic?" Beatrice continued, her tone rising with vicious confidence. "I will tank your business reputation overnight, Maya. I will personally call the board of directors of every single corporate contract you have managed to secure and warn them about your mental instability. I have the social capital in this city to ruin you completely. You will lose everything you built. I will destroy your entire life." My mother smiled, a cold, triumphant smirk spreading across her face. She truly believed she still held the power in this dynamic. She believed her vast social connections and her practiced ability to manipulate the media could somehow override the mountains of federal evidence currently sitting on Liam encrypted servers. She thought she could bully me back into submission with the hollow threat of public humiliation. She had spent my entire life wielding her reputation as a weapon to keep me compliant and invisible. I did not raise my voice. I did not defend my business reputation. I simply unclasped my evening bag and reached inside. I pulled out a single folded sheet of thick legal paper and held it out to her. Beatrice frowned, staring at the document like it was a venomous snake preparing to strike. "What is this?" she demanded, refusing to take it. I pushed the paper directly into her hand, forcing her fingers to close around it. "It is the foreclosure eviction notice for the family mansion," I stated, my voice echoing with absolute icy authority. I had Marcus fast-track the court filing an hour ago. The judge signed off immediately because your debt default is catastrophic. You have 24 hours to pack your designer bags. Do not worry, I left you some trash bags on the porch. Beatrice looked down at the eviction notice, her perfectly contoured face contorting with genuine shock and unadulterated fury. Her hands shook violently as her eyes scanned the official legal seals and the irrevocable mandate demanding she vacate the property by tomorrow afternoon. The reality of her total ruin was printed in stark black and white ink. She looked back up at me, her eyes burning with a desperate, vicious hatred. "You are dead to me," she snarled, crumpling the eviction notice in her fist. "I am going to walk onto that stage tonight and I am going to erase you from this family history forever. I will destroy you, Maya." I watched my mother pivot aggressively and storm away toward the grand ballroom, her heels clicking sharply against the polished marble floor. She marched forward with her head held high, desperately clinging to the illusion of her power. I did not say a word. I simply watched her go, completely unaware she was walking blindly into a federally coordinated sting operation. I turned away from the marble pillar and made my way up the concealed service stairwell toward the audiovisual control booth. Down below, the Sovereign Grand Ballroom was rapidly filling with the absolute pinnacle of Atlanta high society. City council members, wealthy real estate developers, and the entire senior leadership board of the Vance megachurch mingled under the glittering light of 3 massive crystal chandeliers. The room hummed with the sound of clinking champagne flutes and the low murmur of practiced networking. Waitstaff glided through the crowd carrying trays of expensive hors d'oeuvres, while a string quartet played softly in the corner. It was a flawless picture of wealth and religious piety, perfectly curated to mask the absolute rot underneath. I locked the heavy steel door of the audiovisual booth behind me and slid into the leather command chair. The entire venue was hardwired into my console. Down on the floor, I watched Victoria and Preston make their grand entrance. If I had not personally witnessed their violent meltdown hours earlier, I might have actually believed the performance they were putting on. They were a masterclass in sociopathic composure. Victoria glided across the carpet in her heavily beaded emerald gown, clinging to Preston's arm, with an adoring smile plastered across her face. The vintage diamonds she had stolen from our grandmother sparkled under the camera flashes. Preston matched her energy perfectly. He wore a tailored tuxedo and a charismatic grin, shaking hands with politicians and offering humble nods to the church elders. They posed for the local press corps, leaning into each other, whispering sweet nothings that were likely vicious threats. They were desperately projecting the image of a united, powerful couple right on the precipice of ruin. Victoria laughed brightly at a joke made by a city councilman, but her eyes were darting frantically toward the exits. My earpiece crackled softly. Liam's voice came through clear and focused from the remote command center in my apartment. Target 1 and Target 2 are on the floor, Maya. The undercover agents have locked down the perimeter. All exits are secured. We are holding position until the primary confession is triggered on the main stage. I confirmed the status with a double tap on my microphone, holding my breath as the evening schedule advanced. I adjusted the master soundboard, lowering the ambient music as the ballroom lights began to dim. A hush fell over the 1,000 guests. A single bright spotlight snapped on, illuminating the center of the grand stage. Beatrice stepped into the light. She looked regal in her black velvet gown, stepping up to the crystal podium with the practiced grace of a seasoned televangelist wife. The massive LED projector screen behind her displayed the intricate Vance family crest bathed in a soft golden glow. Beatrice grasped the edges of the podium, looking out over the sea of wealthy faces. When she spoke, her voice was a perfectly calibrated instrument of emotional manipulation. "Thank you all for gathering here tonight." She began, her tone trembling with just the right amount of manufactured grief. "We are here to honor a man who gave his entire life to this community. My beloved husband, Arthur Vance, believed that true faith was demonstrated through charity. He built the Vance Megachurch Community Fund to be a beacon of hope for the forgotten and the vulnerable in our great city." The crowd murmured in respectful agreement. I watched my mother pause, reaching up to dab a non-existent tear from the corner of her eye. She was brilliant at this. She knew exactly how to play the grieving widow, harvesting the sympathy of the room while she secretly planned to drain the very charity she was currently praising. Arthur's vision was massive. Beatrice continued, her voice swelling with artificial pride. But he knew his time on this earth was limited. He knew he needed a successor who possessed the same moral clarity, the same unwavering dedication to our congregation. He needed someone who could steward $50 million of community goodwill into the next decade. Someone who would not be tempted by greed, but driven by faith. He found that dedication in our family. He found it in a man who has shown nothing but absolute devotion to our church and to my beautiful daughter, Victoria. Beatrice extended her arm toward the front row. The spotlight expanded to capture Preston, who stood up and buttoned his suit jacket, offering a humble bow to the applauding audience. It is my absolute honor to officially announce the new executive director of the Vance Megachurch Community Fund. Beatrice declared, her voice ringing out through the state-of-the-art sound system I now completely controlled. Please welcome my son-in-law, Preston Vance. The ballroom erupted into thunderous applause. Politicians stood up, clapping enthusiastically. Church elders nodded their approval. Victoria beamed at her husband, playing the role of the proud, supportive wife to absolute perfection. Preston walked up the short flight of stairs and joined Beatrice on the stage. They embraced for the cameras, a sickening display of unity. Preston stepped up to the microphone, gripping the podium as he prepared to deliver his acceptance speech. He looked out at the audience, soaking in the adulation, believing he had somehow managed to outrun the federal trap closing in around him. He thought his empty offshore accounts and his toxic real estate debt were safely hidden behind the applause of 1,000 powerful people. I leaned forward in the control booth, resting my hand on the digital override console. The time for hiding was officially over. I typed a single command sequence into the encrypted laptop and hit the execute key. Down on the stage, Preston opened his mouth to speak, but his microphone was completely dead. He tapped the microphone head, a confused frown breaking his charismatic smile. A sudden sharp burst of static shrieked through the ballroom's surround sound speakers, causing the front row guests to flinch and cover their ears. The massive glowing LED projector screen behind Preston and Beatrice suddenly violently glitched. The golden Vance family crest warped, digitized, and completely vanished into a sea of black pixels. The applause in the ballroom abruptly died out, replaced by a tense, confused silence. People began to murmur, looking around the room for security. Beatrice turned around to look at the screen, her eyes widening in sudden terror. Preston stumbled backward, away from the podium, his face draining of all color. The giant black screen flickered once. A massive digital timer appeared in stark white numbers, illuminating the horrified faces of my mother and my brother-in-law. The timer began to count down, echoing with a loud mechanical beep through the silent ballroom. 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0. The massive double mahogany doors at the rear of the Sovereign Grand Ballroom slammed open. The heavy thud echoed like a physical blow against the sudden suffocating silence of the room. Every head in the 1,000-person crowd snapped backward. I stood perfectly framed in the grand archway. I was not the broken, discarded daughter they had been told about. I wore a breathtaking, bespoke midnight blue silk gown that moved like liquid glass against the plush carpet. Around my neck and wrists rested the authentic Harrington family diamonds, blazing with cold fire under the light of the crystal chandeliers. Liam stood a half step behind my right shoulder, looking utterly lethal in a razor-sharp black tuxedo. His posture radiated the absolute, unwavering authority of a federal operative ready to spring the final trap. I stepped forward into the room. The dense crowd of politicians, real estate magnates, and church elders automatically parted for me. They cleared a wide aisle to the stage, staring in absolute bewilderment as I marched toward my mother and sister. On the stage, Beatrice gripped the edges of the crystal podium so hard her knuckles turned stark white. Her perfectly contoured face twisted into a mask of pure, unfiltered panic. She leaned into the microphone, but it remained completely dead. She realized her voice had been stripped from her. She abandoned the podium and stepped to the very edge of the stage, pointing a trembling, manicured finger directly at my face. "Security!" Beatrice shrieked, her voice cracking with raw desperation as she projected over the silent crowd. "Grab that woman immediately. She is trespassing. She is violently unstable. I want her removed from this building right now. Throw them both out into the street." Two massive private security guards in dark suits stepped forward from the shadows of the floral arrangements, moving to intercept me. Liam did not even break his stride. He simply reached inside his tuxedo jacket and let his hand rest visibly on the grip of his holstered service weapon, allowing the gold federal investigator badge clipped to his belt to catch the chandelier light. The security guards stopped dead in their tracks, instantly recognizing federal authority. They backed away, raising their hands in silent surrender. I continued my slow, deliberate walk until I reached the absolute center of the ballroom floor. I stopped right at the edge of the stage, looking up at my mother, my sister, and my brother-in-law. Victoria was trembling violently, her hands clutching the stolen vintage choker at her neck. Preston looked like he was about to physically collapse, his eyes darting frantically toward the service exits. I did not scream. I did not hurl accusations. I simply held up my personal cell phone and tapped a single button on the glowing screen. The sovereign grand state-of-the-art surround sound system roared to life. But it was not music playing. It was the crystal-clear, high-definition audio recording I had captured just hours earlier in the Buckhead Estate study. Preston's panicked voice violently filled the ballroom, bouncing off the velvet-draped walls with terrifying clarity. "The church charity fund is gone. Victoria." The recorded voice of Preston echoed through the massive speakers. "The offshore accounts are completely drained. I had to leverage everything to cover the Macau gambling syndicates. They were going to kill me, Victoria. I funneled the $50 million to pay off my gambling debts, and now the feds have the master ledger. We are completely bankrupt. We have absolutely nothing left. We need to run right now before the feds surround this estate." A collective gasp ripped through the massive audience. The mayor of Atlanta dropped his crystal champagne flute. It shattered against the polished hardwood floorboards, but nobody even looked down. Church elders stared at the stage in absolute, unadulterated horror. Wealthy donors, who had poured millions into the Vance Megachurch Community Fund, covered their mouths in shock. The recording did not stop. It continued broadcasting Victoria's selfish, arrogant refusal, followed by the devastating climax of their screaming match. "You think the FBI is going to care about white-collar embezzlement when they pull your father toxicology report?" Preston's voice roared through the speakers. "Maya knows about the Digitalis compound. She knows he did not have a spontaneous heart attack. I did not slip the poison into your father. Drink you did. You and your mother. I am not going down for capital murder because you two psychopathic women could not wait for your inheritance." The entire ballroom descended into absolute chaos. Whispers instantly escalated into furious shouts. The elite of Atlanta, the very people Beatrice had invited to validate her fabricated empire, were now staring at her like she was a monster. Wealthy investors pushed forward, shouting demands for their stolen money. The pristine facade of the Vance family was completely obliterated in front of the entire city. On the stage, Victoria dropped to her knees, sobbing hysterically and covering her ears, as if she could somehow block out the sound of her own ruined life. Beatrice stumbled backward, clutching her chest, unable to comprehend the sheer magnitude of her destruction. Preston realized the gravity of the situation. The recording was the final nail in his coffin. The public humiliation, the financial ruin, the impending federal charges for grand larceny and accessory to murder, it all crashed down on his shoulders at once. He looked at the angry mob of betrayed investors and church leaders forming at the base of the stage. He did not look at Victoria. He did not look at Beatrice. Preston bolted. He spun around and vaulted off the side of the stage, knocking over a massive floral arrangement of white lilies. He hit the ground, running his tailored tuxedo jacket, flapping behind him as he sprinted desperately toward the heavy brass doors of the side service exit. He shoved past a terrified catering waiter, sending a silver tray of appetizers crashing to the floor. He lunged for the brass handles, hitting the doors with his full body weight, desperate to escape into the alleyway. The heavy doors flew open, but Preston did not make it out. He slammed directly into a solid wall of dark suits. 5 federal agents stood shoulder to shoulder, their badges gleaming under the exit lights, barricading the doors entirely. Preston recoiled from the brass doors as if he had been physically struck by a freight train. The lead federal agent did not even flinch. He simply reached out and shoved Preston squarely in the chest, forcing him stumbling backward into the ballroom. The agent pulled the heavy doors shut until they locked with a resounding click, standing shoulder to shoulder with his tactical unit to block the only viable exit. Preston spun around wildly, his breath coming in sharp, desperate gasps. He looked toward the main entrance at the far end of the hall, but another squad of federal agents had already marched through the double doors, forming an impenetrable human barricade. The trap was entirely sealed. The Sovereign Grand Ballroom had descended into a terrifying cacophony of outrage. The same elite politicians and wealthy real estate developers who had been applauding Preston mere moments ago were now turning into an angry mob. A prominent city councilman shouted for hotel security. The senior elders of the Vance mega church were demanding immediate answers, their faces flushed with righteous fury, as the reality of their stolen $50 million settled in. Smartphones were held high in the air, capturing every pathetic second of the fallout. Preston scrambled back toward the stage, tripping over the hem of a discarded silk tablecloth. His tailored tuxedo was rumpled, his hair slick with nervous sweat. He looked up at the stage where Victoria was still on her knees, sobbing into her hands. In that fraction of a second, every ounce of his fabricated marital loyalty evaporated. The survival instinct of a cornered rat completely took over. Preston scrambled up the first two stairs and pointed a violently trembling finger directly at his wife. He turned to face the screaming crowd of investors and church leaders desperately seeking a scapegoat to absorb the federal wrath. "It was her idea," Preston shouted, his voice cracking as he tried to project over the noise of the ballroom. He pointed at Victoria again, his face twisted in a mask of cowardly betrayal. "Do not look at me. I was just following her instructions." She manipulated the entire shadow audit. She forged the charity documents. Victoria's head snapped up. The fake tears instantly stopped flowing. Her smeared makeup and ruined updo made her look entirely unhinged, but the sheer venom that flashed in her eyes was terrifyingly focused. She masterminded the shell companies. Preston continued frantically screaming at the federal agents guarding the doors. "She forced me to leverage the residential debt to cover her tracks. I am a victim of her financial coercion. She set this entire thing up." Victoria pushed herself off the floor. The heavy beaded emerald gown snagged on the edge of the crystal podium, but she tore it free with a violent jerk. She marched across the stage toward her husband, her hands clenched into fists. The polished, untouchable socialite was entirely gone, replaced by a vicious, desperate woman watching her kingdom burn. She did not say a word as she approached him. She simply reared back her arm and delivered a devastating open-handed slap directly across his face. The sharp crack of the impact echoed through the ballroom, momentarily silencing the front row of the crowd. Preston's head whipped to the side and he stumbled backward, gripping his rapidly swelling cheek in shock. "You worthless leech!" Victoria screamed, her voice tearing through her throat with unadulterated primal rage. She lunged forward, shoving him hard against the digital projector screen. "Do not you dare try to pin your pathetic gambling addiction on me. I paid for your entire life with my father money. You brought absolutely nothing to this marriage but debt and incompetence. You are a complete failure." Preston shoved her back, his own temper finally boiling over. "I am a failure because I married a sociopath," he roared. "You and your mother ruined this family long before I ever touched that charity fund." The pristine illusion of the Vance family was entirely dismantled right in front of the most esteemed guests in Atlanta. The carefully curated image of Black excellence that Beatrice had spent decades maintaining was reduced to a trashy screaming match on a brightly lit stage. The high society crowd watched in absolute horror as the glamorous couple tore each other apart, exposing the darkest, most venomous corners of their marriage for the entire city to see. I stood perfectly still in the center of the ballroom aisle, absorbing the absolute destruction I had orchestrated. The feeling of vindication was a cold, heavy weight settling comfortably in my chest. I began to walk. My midnight blue silk gown glided silently over the plush carpet as I approached the stairs. The crowd parted for me without a single word of protest. They stepped back, watching me with a mixture of profound shock and newfound respect. I was no longer the discarded daughter they had been told to ignore. I was the architect of this entire reckoning. I walked up the short flight of stairs, my heels clicking softly against the polished wood of the stage. Liam followed a half step behind me, a silent, lethal shadow ensuring absolutely no one interfered. Preston and Victoria immediately stopped screaming as I approached. They backed away from me, their chests heaving, retreating to the far corner of the stage like terrified children. I ignored them completely. I turned my attention to the center of the stage. Beatrice stood frozen near the crystal podium. She looked like a ghost. Her aristocratic posture had completely collapsed. Her shoulders slumped under the crushing weight of her public ruin. She stared out at the sea of camera phones flashing in the crowd, watching her lifelong reputation dissolve into irredeemable ash. I stopped directly in front of her, looking down at the woman who had made my entire existence a living nightmare. "It is over, Mother," I stated, my voice perfectly calm and completely merciless. "The offshore accounts are empty. The charity is bankrupt. You do not own your home and you no longer own this city. Your performance is officially cancelled." Beatrice's head snapped up. Her eyes were completely bloodshot, burning with a manic, cornered desperation. The sheer humiliation of being spoken down to by the daughter she despised finally broke the last remaining thread of her sanity. She let out a guttural shriek of pure rage. She raised her hand, her diamond rings flashing under the stage lights, aiming a vicious, desperate slap directly at my face. I did not even blink. Before her hand could cross the space between us, Liam lunged forward. He moved with terrifying tactical speed, intercepting her wrist mid-air. His grip was absolute, locking her arm in place with effortless strength. Beatrice gasped, struggling wildly to pull her arm free, but Liam did not budge an inch. With his free hand, Liam reached into his tuxedo jacket and smoothly retrieved his credentials. He flipped the leather wallet open, holding the gold federal investigator badge directly in front of her shocked face. "Beatrice Vance Liam," announced his voice, cutting through the remaining noise in the ballroom with cold, unyielding authority. "You are under investigation for federal wire fraud." The word fraud hung in the stagnant air of the ballroom like a physical weight. Beatrice stood entirely paralyzed, her wrist still caught in Liam's iron grip. Her jaw slacked, and her eyes darted frantically around the room, searching for a single sympathetic face among the hundreds of wealthy donors and church elders. She found absolutely nothing. The elite of Atlanta stared back at her with expressions of sheer, undisguised revulsion. The grand matriarch of the Vance family had been publicly stripped of her crown, reduced to a common criminal caught dead to rights. Liam released her wrist with a look of utter disdain. He took a single step back, positioning himself between my mother and the crystal podium, securing the stage for what I was about to do next. I walked past Beatrice without giving her a second glance. I stepped up to the crystal podium and gripped the smooth glass edges. The microphone, which had been dead for Preston, instantly crackled to life under my digital command. The sharp whine of audio feedback pierced the massive ballroom, instantly silencing the frantic whispers of the horrified crowd. 1,000 pairs of eyes locked onto me. I commanded the absolute attention of every single person in the room. Wire fraud and federal embezzlement are certainly impressive charges. I began, my voice projecting smooth and deadly calm through the towering speaker stacks. But fraud is not the only thing we are celebrating tonight. I reached down and tapped the screen of my encrypted laptop resting on the lower shelf of the podium. The massive LED projector screen behind me violently shifted colors again. The digital countdown vanished. In its place, a highly classified financial document filled the screen, spanning 20 feet high for everyone to see. "This is the personal encrypted ledger of my late father, Arthur Vance," I announced, gesturing to the screen. If you look closely at the highlighted columns from 6 months ago, you will see that my father was a meticulous accountant. He discovered a catastrophic discrepancy in the mega-church community fund. He found the shell companies. He found the offshore transfers. He realized that his own wife and his youngest daughter were bleeding his life's work completely dry to fund their lavish lifestyle. A collective murmur of shock rippled through the front rows. Several city councilmen began whispering furiously to their aides. My father was a deeply righteous man. I continued staring directly out into the sea of faces. He was preparing to go to the federal authorities himself. He was going to blow the whistle on his own family to protect the integrity of this church. But he never made it to the FBI. He died of a sudden massive heart attack sitting in his own study the very night before his scheduled meeting with the authorities. I tapped the laptop screen one more time. The financial ledger vanished. A stark white medical document replaced it, bearing the official seal of the United States Treasury Department and a top-tier federal laboratory. Sections of the text were highlighted in blaring neon red. The word lethal was printed in bold type. For months, I was told my father possessed a weak heart. I said, my voice dropping to a dangerous razor-sharp register. I was told it was a tragic natural event. But then my sister handed me a poisoned bottle of vintage vodka. She wanted to eliminate the last remaining heir who could challenge her claim to the estate. Fortunately for me, a federal agent intercepted that drink. I pointed to the massive document on the screen. This is the toxicology report from Liam Federal Blood Work, I declared. It shows massive concentrations of a highly toxic cardiac-inducing digitalis compound, an untraceable chemical designed to mimic a massive heart attack. It is the exact same chemical signature found in my father's exhumed tissue samples. I turned away from the crowd and looked Victoria dead in the eye. She was backed into the far corner of the stage, trembling so violently her emerald gown shook. Her face was ashen, and her eyes were wide with pure, unadulterated terror. The trap had entirely snapped shut, breaking her spine. "You did not just steal Dad's legacy," I stated, my voice echoing like thunder through the silent ballroom. "When he found out what you were doing, you and Mom spiked his evening tea with the exact same cardiac-inducing chemical you tried to give me in that vodka. You murdered your own father in cold blood to protect your bank accounts." The ballroom erupted into absolute earth-shattering chaos. The sophisticated veneer of high society completely vanished, replaced by a stampede of panic. In the front row, two elderly deacons of the Vance megachurch physically collapsed, fainting straight into the aisles as the reality of the murder struck them. Politicians who had smiled for photos with Beatrice just 20 minutes earlier were now shoving chairs out of their way, running frantically away from the tables. They sprinted toward the back of the room, terrified of being associated with a family of sociopathic murderers. Women in expensive gowns shrieked, dropping their designer clutches as they scrambled to distance themselves from the stage. The federal agents stationed at the barricaded doors drew their weapons, holding the perimeter tight, refusing to let a single person leave the active crime scene. The sovereign grand had turned into a gilded cage. On the stage, the overwhelming pressure of the federal evidence, the screaming crowd, and the inescapable reality of a life sentence behind bars finally shattered Victoria completely. Her arrogant, narcissistic facade cracked into a million jagged pieces. She let out a guttural, wailing scream and dropped straight to her knees. The vintage diamonds around her neck dug into her skin as she pulled at her own hair, sobbing hysterically. The polished socialite was gone, leaving nothing but a terrified, cornered animal begging for her life. "I did not want to do it," Victoria screamed, her voice tearing through the chaotic noise of the ballroom. Tears and mascara streamed down her face as she looked wildly between Liam and the federal agents moving toward the stage. "She forced me. She made me do it." Victoria pointed a shaking, violently accusatory finger directly at Beatrice. My mother stood frozen, her face twisting in pure horror as her golden child publicly threw her to the wolves. "It was her," Victoria wailed, throwing herself onto the floorboards in a pathetic display of self-preservation. "Mother bought the poison on the dark web. She mixed it into his tea. She said he was going to ruin us. She said we would be poor. I just wanted the money. I did not want to kill him. She made me do it. She killed him. Arrest her." "And conspiracy to commit murder," Liam added, his voice dropping a terrifying octave as he signaled the tactical team waiting in the wings. Beatrice's face went completely slack. The sheer arrogant defiance that had fueled her entire existence evaporated in a single devastating heartbeat. She looked wildly from Liam to the glowing toxicology report still projected on the massive screen behind her, and finally down to Victoria, who was still sobbing hysterically on the floorboards. Her own daughter had just handed the federal government the murder weapon on a silver platter. "You lying, ungrateful wretch," Beatrice hissed, aiming a vicious kick at Victoria. "I gave you everything. I built this empire for you." Liam did not give her another second to speak. He twisted her arm firmly behind her back and slammed her face first against the polished surface of the crystal podium. The heavy thud of her cheek hitting the glass echoed through the microphone, sending a sharp screech of feedback across the silent ballroom. The crowd of elite politicians and church leaders gasped, retreating further into the shadows of the floral arrangements. They were watching the untouchable matriarch of Atlanta high society being treated like a common street criminal. Down at the back of the ballroom, Preston was faring no better. The federal agents guarding the service exit did not handle him with any of the deference he expected. Two burly agents grabbed him by the lapels of his custom tuxedo and slammed him violently against the brass doors. Preston let out a pathetic squeak of pain as his cheek smashed against the cold metal. Preston Vance, an agent, barked, pulling Preston's arms roughly behind his back. "You are under arrest for grand larceny, wire fraud, and federal embezzlement. You have the right to remain silent. I highly suggest you use it." I watched from the stage as the heavy steel handcuffs clicked shut around Preston's wrists. The golden boy of the Vance mega church. The man who had stood on this very stage 10 minutes ago, soaking in the adulation of 1,000 wealthy donors, was now weeping openly. He sagged against the doors, his knees giving out as the agents patted him down. He cried out for his lawyer, begging the city councilman in the front row for help. Not a single person stepped forward. The investors he had defrauded watched him with absolute seething contempt. Back on the stage, two female federal agents marched up the stairs and hauled Victoria off the floor. She thrashed against their grip, her emerald gown tearing at the seam. Her perfectly styled hair was a tangled rat nest falling into her mascara-stained eyes. "Get your hands off me!" Victoria shrieked, trying to wrench her arms away. "I am the victim here. My mother forced me to do it. Preston stole the money. I am cooperating. You cannot arrest me." Victoria Vance, the lead agent, stated, her voice flat and completely devoid of sympathy. "You are under arrest for conspiracy to commit murder and the attempted murder of Maya Vance." The sharp, metallic ratcheting of the handcuffs locking securely around Victoria's wrists sounded like absolute music to my ears. She gasped, staring down at the steel bracelets binding her hands together. The vintage Harrington diamonds sparkling around her neck suddenly looked like a glittering noose. She stopped fighting the agents and went completely limp, finally realizing that her immense privilege and her fabricated victimhood could no longer save her. Liam pulled Beatrice upright, securing the cuffs tightly around her wrists. He spun her around to face the crowd. My mother looked absolutely feral. Her velvet gown was rumpled. Her flawless makeup was smudged across her cheek from where she had hit the podium. The dignified, pious widow act was entirely dead. She locked eyes with me. The sheer concentrated hatred radiating from her glare was toxic enough to kill. She thrashed against Liam's grip, leaning forward as far as the restraints would allow. "You are a monster!" Beatrice spat the venom practically dripping from her lips. "You destroyed your own blood. You tore down your father's legacy. You are nothing but a vindictive psycho." I did not raise my voice. I did not flinch. I stepped calmly across the stage, closing the distance between us until I was standing inches from her face. I reached out and gently smoothed down the disheveled collar of her velvet gown. My touch was light, entirely patronizing, and completely unbothered. "No, Mom," I replied, my voice ringing with crystal-clear authority over the silent ballroom. "I am a cybersecurity CEO, a loving fiancé, and the sole owner of everything you used to claim as yours. Have a nice life in federal prison." Beatrice let out a strangled, choked gasp of pure fury. She lunged at me, snapping her teeth like a rabid animal, but Liam yanked her backward effortlessly, subduing her. "Get them out of here," Liam commanded, signaling the tactical team. The federal agents moved in unison. They shoved Beatrice, Victoria, and Preston forward, forcing them to march single file down the center aisle of the grand ballroom. The sea of wealthy donors, church elders, and politicians parted widely, refusing to even brush shoulders with the disgraced family. As they reached the lobby, the heavy double doors swung open to reveal the true nightmare waiting for them outside. The local and national press corps had been tipped off by Liam team. A blinding wall of camera flashes erupted instantly. Dozens of reporters shoved microphones forward, shouting frantic questions about the poison tea, the stolen charity funds, and the fake offshore accounts. The brilliant, unforgiving lights illuminated every single flaw on Beatrice's ruined face. Victoria wept openly, bowing her head to hide from the cameras, while Preston tried to shield his face with his cuffed hands. The Black Excellence facade was entirely dismantled, broadcast live to millions of viewers across the country. The federal agents pushed them relentlessly through the gauntlet of aggressive reporters, shoving their heads down as they forced them into the back of 3 separate waiting police cruisers. The red and blue emergency lights flashed frantically against the marble pillars of the Sovereign Grand, capturing their ultimate public ruin. Exactly 1 month had passed since the red and blue sirens illuminated the Sovereign Grand. The oppressive, suffocating energy that had plagued the Vance family mansion for over 2 decades was entirely eradicated. I stood in the center of the grand foyer, holding a steaming mug of black coffee, breathing in the scent of fresh paint and polished cedar. The heavy velvet drapes, the gaudy gold leaf mirrors, and the absurdly pretentious portraits Beatrice had commissioned of herself were all gone. I had hired a crew to completely gut the interior the very morning the federal judge handed me the deed. The mansion was no longer a monument to my mother's narcissism and toxic vanity. It was a home. Sunlight poured through the massive floor-to-ceiling windows, illuminating the sleek modern furniture and the vibrant contemporary artwork I had carefully selected. The air felt incredibly light. For the first time in my entire life, I felt entirely safe within these walls. The fallout from the gala had been swift and absolute. The federal prosecutors did not offer Beatrice a single ounce of leniency. Facing overwhelming digital evidence of embezzlement, wire fraud, and capital murder, the Grand Matriarch of Atlanta High Society was denied bail. She was currently sitting in a maximum security holding cell awaiting a trial that would undoubtedly end in a life sentence. Preston had immediately turned state evidence against Victoria in a pathetic attempt to save himself, but the judge still handed him a mandatory 15-year sentence in federal prison. With the corrupt regime completely dismantled, I had finally been able to focus on the true reconstruction of my father's legacy. The legal process of untangling his legitimate assets from Beatrice offshore shell companies had been exhausting but deeply rewarding. Working alongside Liam Federal Task Force and my own corporate attorneys at Apex Cyber, I legally dissolved the fraudulent megachurch community fund. Every single stolen cent was traced and returned to the defrauded investors. But my father's original clean capital remained untouched. I took those remaining $50 million and created exactly what Arthur Vance had always wanted. I established a massive, irrevocable trust called the Vance Innovation Scholarship. It was specifically designed to fund full-ride college tuition, supply high-end laptops, and provide direct corporate mentorship for underprivileged Black girls pursuing degrees in cybersecurity and technology. I wanted to ensure that young, brilliant women who looked just like me would never have to fight for a seat at the table. They would own the table. I had finally washed away the horrific stain my mother and sister had left on our family name, replacing it with a legacy of genuine empowerment. I walked up the sweeping mahogany staircase and pushed open the double doors to the newly renovated master study. Liam was already inside, sitting comfortably behind my expansive glass desk, typing away on his encrypted laptop. He looked up as I entered, his eyes softening with that familiar protective warmth. He reached into his leather briefcase and pulled out a small stack of morning mail, sliding it across the desk toward me. I flipped through the sleek corporate envelopes from Apex Cyber until I reached the very bottom of the stack. A stark, cheap brown envelope rested against the glass. The return address was stamped with the official seal of the Fulton County Federal Detention Center. The handwriting scrawled across the front was frantic, messy, and unmistakably familiar. It was from Victoria. I set my coffee mug down and sliced the envelope open with a silver letter opener. I pulled out a single sheet of lined institutional paper. The words were smeared with dried tears. "Maya, please, you have to help me." The letter began abandoning any pretense of pride. "I am begging you. The food here is completely inedible and my cellmate is terrifying. Mother refuses to speak to me, and Preston lawyers will not return my calls. I have absolutely nothing left, Maya. They froze all my personal accounts. I know we had our differences, but we are still blood. You are a millionaire. Just wire $2,000 to my commissary account so I can buy basic necessities. Please, Maya, you owe me this much as your sister. I am so sorry. Save me." I stood perfectly still, reading the pathetic, desperate words. A year ago, a letter like this might have triggered a trauma response. It might have made me feel a lingering sense of guilt or a misplaced obligation to the woman who shared my DNA. But standing in the sunlight of my own study, completely secure in my own power, I felt absolutely nothing. The spell was completely broken. Victoria was still trying to manipulate me, still trying to play the victim, still refusing to take a single ounce of accountability for handing me a poisoned drink. She had not changed at all, but I had. I did not write a response. I did not feel a single shred of pity. I simply turned around and walked over to the heavy-duty industrial paper shredder resting in the corner of the office. I hit the power button. The machine whirred to life with a low, mechanical hum. I held the tear-stained letter over the metal teeth and dropped it in without a second thought. The sharp steel blades caught the cheap paper, instantly destroying Victoria's final pathetic attempt at manipulation. I watched the shredded pieces fall into the clear plastic bin, effectively erasing her from my life forever. The conflict of my past was fully, definitively resolved. I had reclaimed my father's true legacy, my wealth, and my absolute peace of mind. Liam stood up from the desk and walked over to me. He stepped behind me, wrapping his strong arms securely around my waist and pulling my back flush against his chest. He pressed a soft, warm kiss into the crown of my head, resting his chin against my hair, as we looked out the massive bay windows together. "Ready for the board meeting, Madame CEO Liam?" asked, his voice a low, comforting rumble against my ear. I smiled, leaning back into his embrace and looking out over the sprawling green lawns of my estate. The morning sky was a brilliant, crystal-clear blue, completely devoid of clouds. "Always," I replied. I was no longer the outcast, no longer the scapegoat, and no longer the victim of the Vance family. I was a woman who had taken every single heavy, jagged stone they had thrown at me and used them to build an unbreakable empire. The profound lesson from Maya's journey is that true power lies in fiercely reclaiming your narrative. Blood relations do not excuse abusive behavior. Severing toxic ties is a necessary act of self-preservation. Maya demonstrates that the most devastating revenge isn't merely exposing the villains, it is transforming their wreckage into a foundation for genuine good. By dismantling her family's corrupt empire to launch a scholarship for marginalized girls, she proves that real wealth is built on unyielding integrity. You can always rise from the ashes of betrayal to build a beautiful, thriving empire of your own. Hit that like button and subscribe for more empowering stories of resilience, justice, and ultimate vindication.